Hey kids, you're probably familiar with at least a few characters whose obsessive penny pinching truly knows no bounds. Yes, from Ebenezer Scrooge to Scrooge McDuck, nobody hoards money quite like misers. But these guys aren't the most miserly misers out there, not by a long shot. First of all, look at their top hats, their extravagant use of glasses, their luxurious chairs. These things are worth their weight in precious shekels. No true miser would waste their wealth on such frills. Second of all, these guys aren't real. They're fictional characters. Scrooge McDuck does not exist. I don't care what CNN says, it's all liberal conspiracy bullshit. I mean, look at this article by the Huffington Post. You mean to tell me that this picture isn't photoshopped? Ridiculous. But you know who was real? One Daniel Dancer of London, England. Born in 1716, Daniel's father died at a young age, leaving behind a large agricultural estate for Daniel to oversee. When it was first inherited, the property brought in a few £100s a year, which doesn't sound like much today, but given that a general laborer could be expected to make around £19 per year in 1710, it's safe to say that Dancer could afford to live a fairly lavish lifestyle off his passive income alone. But Dan was like, you know, all this food and clothing and stuff is alright, but you know what I really like? Owning money. Say, how much does a pound cost? Well, that's a complicated question, Daniel. Can currency really be said to have intrinsic value? Some economists believe that— TLDR please, they cost a pound. Jesus, that's a lot. I better start saving. Thus began one of the most intentionally frugal lifestyles history has ever seen. Let me walk you through a few of Dancer's day-to-day habits. First of all, soap, don't even think about it. The closest thing to bathing that Daniel did was during the summer months when, once or twice a week, he'd wade into the nearby pond and scrub his face with a handful of sand. Say what you will, but what he lacked in deodorization, he certainly made up for in exfoliation. Admittedly, all of London probably reeked to high hell back then, so while Daniel's smell might not have tipped people off to his eccentricity, his clothes almost certainly did. On a good day, he'd be seen in one of his coats, which were homemade patchwork abominations of various garments that Dancer found on the streets and local dust heaps, looking like a walking dementia patient sewing circle. Similarly, all his shoes were either scavenged or Frankensteined out of other pairs of shoes he already owned, with the whole ensemble being barely held together with haphazardly tied bands made of the hay grown on his estate. In fact, a lot of the time, he'd ditch normal clothes altogether and just wear the hay. To his credit, in his youth, Daniel was known to purchase a whole 2 shirts per year as his clothing expense, but one day he looked in the mirror and said, "Daniel, you're bleeding funds like a stuck pig. It's time to grow up and get your act together," and cut his budget to only 1 shirt per year. One of the few people that Daniel associated with regularly was his sister, whom he lived with. Believe it or not, she shared in a lot of Daniel's tight-fisted habits, and it definitely showed. She was described as, quote, having more the appearance of a walking dunghill than one of the fair sex. Couldn't have said it better myself, honestly. Dancer prepared all of his food for the upcoming week ahead of time, consisting of only 14 hard dumplings and 3 pounds of beef stretched out over the entire 7-day period. Every day, he'd eat only a single meal that was basically equivalent to 2 wads of dried out dough and 1.5 quarter-pounder patties from McDonald's. He kept this habit up for years without fail, except for one time when he stumbled upon a fully intact, rotting sheep carcass during his daily stroll. He was like, "Good lord, this is just obscene. Who would leave a perfectly good pile of arguably edible meat and organs just sitting around like this?" So he dragged the thing home and made him and his sister a nice big pile of spoiled mutton pies, which they subsisted off of for several weeks. That's a real life hack right there. Who needs refrigeration if it's already rancid, am I right? Despite Daniel's rabid fear of any unnecessary spending, he did own a dog named Bob that he was quite fond of. At this point, I'm almost certain that Dancer just decided to base his entire life off of linoleum by no effect, which is pretty incredible considering linoleum wasn't even invented for another 100 years. Anyway though, one day, Daniel's neighbor came to complain about how Bob had been harassing his sheep. So Daniel said, "Don't worry boy, I ain't gonna kill you. But we don't want a lawsuit on our hands, do we?" "No we don't. What would we do if a lawyer came around here, huh?" "That's right, and make his children watch, yeah." So he decided to take the dog to the local farrier, which is basically a blacksmith that specializes in horseshoes and the like. "Hey, could you make my dog, like, not have teeth anymore?" What kind of business you think I'm running here, boy?" "Come on, man, you file down horses' hooves for a living. Teeth are just tiny mouth hooves. That's close." "Sorry, buddy, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades." Well, got me there. Say, what's a hand grenade? None of my sources say what happened to the dog after his untimely nubbening, but I do know Dan never got sued, so I guess the operation was a success. Daniel's sister passed away in 1766, leaving him so distraught that he actually went out of his way to buy mourning clothes for her funeral. And by that I mean he bought a pair of secondhand black stockings, and that's it. Still, that's a big deal when it comes to the likes of Dancer. At this point, the only person close to a friend that Dancer had was a woman known as Lady Tempest. She was so influential over him that she was actually able to convince him to buy, get this, a 1 shilling hat. This was quite an accomplishment, as Daniel's last hat was older than half of you at 14 years old.
What? I'm not. You don't.
Meow.
You.
Of course, the next time Lady Tempest went to hang out with him, he was still wearing his old disgusting hat. When questioned about the one he bought, he goes, "Oh yeah, that frilly old thing. Sold it for a 6 pence profit. Super easy too. I tell you, forget house flipping. Hat flipping's gonna be the cool new thing pretty soon." Lo and behold, 250 years later, he was wrong. Daniel died at the ripe old age of 78, which seems pretty shocking considering the whole not using soap, eating rotten food thing, but I guess his near total isolation from other people made up for that when it came to preventing illness. Though he never ended up shelling out any of the massive hoard of wealth that he accumulated over this time, his efforts weren't completely in vain. By the time he passed away, Daniel's estate was now pulling in about £3,000 in yearly net revenue, 10 times the amount it earned when he first inherited it. So, moral of the story, parsimony has its place. While it's good to save money, don't torture yourself just for the sake of a few bucks. Next time your parent or significant other insists on turning down the thermostat or keeping the windows up to save gas, just say, hey, are we human or are we Dancer? Till next time, I'm Sam Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, I just woke up from a nap I took in January of 2020 and boy are my arms tired. Let's see what I missed. Queen's dead, war in Ukraine, the Taliban's back. What is... Holy shit! They made a movie called Scoob! Unprecedented global pandemic, Space Jam 2, some popular guy named Brandon. Yep, that just about covers it. Anyway, we all know about the scientific names of animals, but did you ever wonder what they actually mean? To find out, we must look to taxonomists. They're the guys responsible for the systems of nomenclature we use to classify organisms, and boy are they convoluted. First you got the big 8, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I've seen plenty of mnemonic devices for this, but since the D just showed up in the 90s and is still disputed by some scientists, he's usually not included. So allow me to suggest a few. Dizzy kids puke cereal on fairground staff. Dumb kittens pushing cups over feeds growing spite. Donkey Kong's fucking serendipitously. The way this whole thing works differs slightly depending on which kingdom you pick, so today we'll be sticking to the animal one, cause that one's the coolest and I'm in it. So what constitutes each taxon is pretty arbitrary, they basically just serve to act as another set of branches in the tree that taxonomists build. The one exception is species, which is generally defined as any group of animals that can have babies with each other that aren't sterile freaks. Mule, liger, zedonk, skunk ape, they can live fulfilling lives, but they're all shooting blanks, so they don't count. On the other hand, in our innumerable trespasses against God, we can make things like chidanedanes, which actually work, so dogs are dogs are dogs. Besides species though, it's the Wild West in here. Plenty of times, 8 tiers isn't even enough for scientists, so they just stick new sublevels in between. Legions, cohorts, tribes, series, divisions, and if you want to keep going, you can throw all kinds of prefixes on any of these for even more layers. There's even subspecies, which the more pedantic of you may think to yourselves that creating names for subspecies at all kind of undermines the single somewhat agreed upon definition in the whole tree. To that, my friends, taxonomists say, But while that's pretty complex, the actual names themselves are pretty easy to wrap your head around. Though taxonomists may hide behind their fancy Greek and Latin, the Vulgate is no substitute for wit. Now, I've scraped through the scientific names of a load of species, and most of them can be split into a few categories. The simplest ones are the animals that already have names in Greek or Latin. It's a lion, I'm calling it Leo. Done. Tiger, it's a tigris. Cat, it's a catus. Easy. Multi-word names can be translated the same way. For the golden eagle, we got Aquila chrysaetos. Gold eagle eagle. They decided to be a show-off and do eagle in Greek and Latin. Essentially the same though. But if a species is too specific or exotic for a one-to-one translation, that's when you gotta get a little creative. A lot of the time, inspiration comes from just giving the creature the old once-over and pointing out some cool-looking body part. Generally, the more distinct of an identifying feature it is, the more likely it'll get in the name. For example, Homeboy took one look at this thing and said, yup, Red triangle slug. I'm going on break. We call this thing a fucking unicorn, almost like that means one horn or something. Also, some guy deadass looked at an octopus and said, well, all they got is heads and feet. I'ma call them headfoot. And now biologists everywhere say cephalopod unironically. Matter of fact, if it's got feet, chances are that's part of its name somewhere. You got 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 2 feet, equal feet, both feet, double feet, stomach feet, lip feet, sucker feet, wing feet, big feet, slow feet, or feet, both feet, joint feet, no feet, 10,000 feet, cow's feet, spade feet, cat feet, small feet. If it doesn't look that interesting, another thing to point out is where you found it. This could be a territory like American bear or Siamese crocodile, or just a habitat like woods macaque or toilet rat. But that's boring. We need to look at the men behind the magic and what drives and motivates them. Now, if there's one thing that the scientific community loves, it's clout. And there's no better way to go down in history than plastering your own name on some shit you found. But not all fields have the same volume of things to scribble the old John Hancock over. On the one end, you got physicists just making up their own slightly different form of ionizing radiation measurement. And even then, only the top dogs got away with it. Now, zoology, any little goober flouncing through the underbrush can say, this one has 13 spots, but the one in the book's only got 11. I will call him Splinkus's ladybird. Alternatively, plenty of biologists have given shout-outs to their contemporaries, both other biologists and those across the academic gamut, from geologists to physicists to explorers and more. Naturally, Darwin's got a shitload, but even the background characters get immortalized one way or another. Who are Thomson, Grant, Summering, Erlanger, Speke, and Cuvier? I don't know, but they've all got gazelles, so they must be pretty cool. Of course, other times the name checks go to people who had fuck all to do with anything except for one taxonomist being a fan of theirs. Plenty of popular celebrities have species named after them, but since all the big cute stuff was found and branded a while ago, most of these idols are commemorated through repulsive little invertebrates. You got Scaptia, Beyonce. The only similarity I can gather here is queen bee, looks like a bee, both not a real bee. There's Anomphilus gregarius, an old stone named after an old stone. In 2007, one Jason Bond, a professor of biology at UC Davis, dubbed this little dude Myrmecia Neil Youngie to honor his favorite musician, which caused my man Stephen Colbert to go on TV and profess his utter indignation at not having a spider named after himself. So naturally, the next year, Bond actually went on the Colbert Report to announce the naming of apostagist Stephen Colbert. So, if that gives any of you epic biologists out there any ideas, you know, I wouldn't be opposed. Please, I would do anything. For the love of God, I'll even take a lichen. The world of politics is by no means immune to this phenomenon. Obama alone has fucking 9, as do a load of other presidents. Trump's got a moth with funny hair, Bush has a fungus beetle, Reagan's a wasp, Carter's got a darter, and so forth. Even Austria's most famous painter got the honor through this blind cave beetle. Mind you, it was 1933, so you can only blame the guy a tiny bit. Hitler actually wrote him a letter saying, "Oh, thank you, my little entomolomensch," and then went on to do, you know, Hitler things. Fun fact, not only was this beetle stuck with just about the worst name you could have, it's also now facing extinction solely because of its value to Nazi memorabilia collectors. Guess old habits die hard. Oop, fictional characters have their fair share of species under their belt. On the topic of evil beetles, this one's named after Darth Vader because he kinda looks like his helmet, I guess. This was actually named by the same guy who did the Bush one and belongs to the same genus. There's also this mite, genus Darth Vaderum, which is a lot more accurate and frightening. In 2012, a single bone from above the eye socket of a hitherto unidentified theropod dinosaur was being studied. And suddenly, under the light of the full moon, the guy working with the specimen had his neck covered with hair and his lips clench into a pog and his endocrine system fill with soy, and he said, "It's just like the eye of Sauron." And then he started chewing on Funko Pops and sweating cream of meme and snorting G Fuel and shitting D20s everywhere until the prostate stimulation made him. The dino's genus is now Sauroniops, from Eye of Sauron. This spider was named after Godric Gryffindor because it looks like the Sorting Hat. SpongeBob has not a sponge, but a fungus. The legendary birds from Pokemon each have their own, you guessed it, beetle. And the list goes on. Scientists are nerds. Who knew? Anyway, while this all seems kind of chaotic, there is some method to the madness. One rule is the principle of priority. This states that once somebody publishes their chosen name for a species for the first time, that's the name, and other taxonomists typically can't change it. This has led to plenty of misnomers coined by whoever got their foot in the door first, particularly in the case of the guys doing this stuff before we had the luxury of genetic analysis. Here's one. Red panda? Nah. Shining cat, coined in 1825. To be fair, they're actually about as close to cats as they are to actual pandas, so whatever. Here's 2. Capsicum chinense. Eaten there? Sure. Native? Only off by around half a globe, where literally all hot peppers came from. This principle holds true even if someone thinks they've found a new species, only to later discover that it was already named. For example, in 1824, one John Edward Gray documented the plain zebra, calling it Equus burchellii, or Burchell's horse, named after a renowned naturalist of the day. Little did he know, back in 1785, some other douche classified this character as the quagga. The last quagga died in a Dutch prison in 1883, so why do we care? Well, in the 2000s, scientists decided to scrape some gunk off a dry quagga pelt and study its DNA, and from that they realized, wait a minute, apparently this guy and zebras could have, made a little plaid in the hay together, so technically they're one species, and today they're both called quagga. Sounds kinda asinine, but then again so does asinus, and that worked out fine. Just to maintain the distinction, the extinct subspecies was renamed quagga quagga, so you know it's the real quagga. This double naming convention has been done with a lot of subspecies, in fact. Wild horse, spotted panther, or my favorite, gorilla. Just like, yeah, it's the gorillest gorilla that ever gorilled. Fuck you want from me. A closely related rule also states that the names of all taxa have to be unique. So if 2 people coincidentally name any taxa on the same thing, the older one gets to stay and the new one gets the boot. Like if you saw a genus called echidna, you'd think it was, an echidna, right? Well no, that'd make too much sense. For a while it was true, from 1797 to 1811. Then it was pointed out that someone else already called a genus of moray eels echidna back in 1788, so the real echidna had to be changed to tachyglossus, or quick tongue. Then a decade later, a dude did the same thing for a genus of vipers. Another 22 years passed, people discovered the same thing, and they were renamed to bitis, cause they bit us. That one at least made a bit of sense, given that the original echidna from Greek mythology was half lady, half snake, but who cares at this point. Anyway, I've just barely scraped the surface of all the goofy names out there, so feel free to post more down below. That's all I've got for now. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and I'll see ya in 2025. Don't say it, don't think it, don't say it, don't think it.
Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about the Great Emu War. So here's what happened, right? Our story begins in Australia, home of the upside down whopper. The year is 1932. A very large chunk of the country's population lives on homesteads, just putting seeds in the ground and waiting for food to show up, But their lives are hard. Firstly, Australian soil kind of blows. It's pretty terrible for farming. Like on a scale from Margaret Thatcher's corpse to Octomom, Australia's soil is a solid Hillary Clinton in fertility. Secondly, the whole Great Depression thing's going on, which automatically makes everything suck worse. And third, and possibly most important, is the emu infestation. These gangly dill holes were all over the place, just walking on crops and crapping on crops and crapping on walks and cropping on craps and crabbing on docks and captain on the rocks. You get the idea. So the government evaluated the situation. They were like, well, let's weigh our options here. As a government, we could start spending even more money to secure the welfare of our citizens through this socioeconomic crisis. Money that we barely even have. Or, alternatively, we could just start fucking slaughtering emus, so at least it looks like we're helping. So that's what they did. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Australian military was put in command of the operation, and he had a total of 2 soldiers at his disposal, each of which had a light machine gun. Additionally, the pair was given a total of 10,000 rounds of ammunition to be spent on taking out emus. So on paper that sounds like a piece of cake. They're basically just big turkeys on stilts, so how hard could it be? Well, apparently, pretty frickin' hard. Let me learn you kids a thing or two about emus. First of all, emus are tough as hell. Their bodies are basically like meat-laden tanks. They can definitely take a bullet or 3 and still keep running long enough to get away. Secondly, these fuckers have tactics. Like guerrilla warfare, it ain't got shit on emu warfare. They start out in a big herd or flock or pod, I don't really know. Let me Google it. Okay, a group of emus is technically called a mob. So you got a big mob of emus, right? And as soon as they sense danger, they break up into a bunch of little mobs and start scattering in every direction. So if you're spraying them down with a machine gun, you can't just whip it around all over the place. You have to focus your fire on one group at a time, meaning most of the others could get away pretty easily. I don't know if they had like a huddle beforehand or if this is just some coincidental product from their ridiculous bird minds, but it was effective either way. So between these two things, taking out the emus ended up being a huge struggle. Here's the story on what happened. So the crew went out in search of emus. The first time they found a mob, they started shooting before the guns were in range, so most of the emus got away. The second time, they waited until the emus were closer, but then the gun jammed, so most of the emus got away. And this sort of pattern went on for a while. At one point, they tried getting on the back of a truck first so they could chase down the mob, but the truck wasn't fast enough to catch up, and the ride was so bumpy that they couldn't aim properly, so most of the emus got away. By the time they got a fourth of the way through their ammo, after 2,500 shots, only
300 or so had been killed, which is tiny compared to the 20,000 birds said to be roaming the outback. At this point, they were like, alright, if I have to look at one more of these Jimmy-legged big bird wannabes, I'm gonna start screaming, so you know what? Fuck it. Let the farmers handle it. Then the farmers were like, hey jackholes, we're still starving out here. You still haven't given us those subsidies you promised. We had to feed the kids fucking dingo meat, which, you know, it's a nice change of pace to have the kids eating the dingoes for once, but that's beside the point. Could you dicks keep at least trying to help us? Thanks. The guys were like, alright, don't get your bogans in a bundle. We'll keep going if only to prove a point. So they kept going, just finding mobs, thinning them out slightly, rinse and repeat, until finally they only had like 100 bullets left. In total, the unit only had 986 confirmed kills. Some emus might have also died from their wounds after the fact, but still, a very large portion of the hordes was still alive. So the military was forced to surrender for real this time. Yes, that's right, kids. The emus won the war. Of course, their victory didn't last too long, because after the failed operation, the government put out a bounty on the emus. And that worked pretty well. Something like 50,000 bounties ended up being cashed out over 6 months in 1934. So the lesson here, kids, is that if you want to commit mass murder, don't crowdfund. Crowdsource. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, had a bad day? Well, could be worse. You could be living in a world without modern anesthetic. Today, we'll be talking about some surgical procedures carried out long before the development of medicine as we know it today. Now, once you go back a certain distance, the line between operation and mutilation is pretty thin. So, for our purposes, surgery refers to any bodily manipulation carried out with the intent of fixing some injury or illness. And away we go. The very first surgery that we have historical evidence for dates as far back as 6500 BC. It's called trepanning, which is a nice word for carving someone's frickin' skull open using nothing but a rock. Maybe a rock on a stick if you were lucky. In all seriousness though, you can see that a good deal of care went into the procedure, which lets us know that this isn't just the result of random injury. Many skulls even showed signs of healing around the holes, meaning plenty of the people who underwent this whole thing just got up and went about their day afterwards. Alright, hold on, you say. This all sounds guano insane. No way this was that common of an occurrence. Well friend, if you've been watching this channel long enough, you should know that if you give human beings the benefit of the doubt, chances are they'll prove you wrong. In fact, so far, over 1,500 trepanned skulls have been dug up all across the globe, from Europe to China and even the Americas. This means that between 5 and 10% of all skulls that we've found from the Neolithic period have had at least one man-made hole scraped into them. To put it this way, based on that data, there's a greater probability of someone born in the late Stone Age having their brain matter exposed by some shaman with a chunk of flint than someone born in the USA being a redhead. To this day, nobody really knows why this was such a common practice, but most theories tend to revolve around the idea of releasing some kind of dark supernatural force from the patient. Man, I'm getting real sick of all these evil entities infecting our minds and bodies. Huh, you can say that again. I tell you, I need these demons like I need a hole in the head. No, wait. Fast forward to 600 BC. Over in India, there lived a guy called Maharshi Susruta. Now, this guy was a medical mastermind. He wrote a treatise known as Susruta Samhita, which described countless different conditions, treatments, and yes, even surgeries. One of which is the first recorded instance of rhinoplasty. That means nose job. A hornbill's a type of bird. I'm here too. Anyway, here's how it's done according to Susruta. First, you get them plastered, obviously. Second, you use a leaf to measure out the part of the nose you want fixed. Then, you use the leaf to cut off a flap of skin from the cheek or forehead of the patient. This part's important though. You gotta remember to leave a little piece of it still attached. Otherwise, you just got a chunk of dirty dead face meat on your hands. Now, wherever you're looking to stick the new flesh on, you rub that part raw with a knife. Also, you're gonna want to stick 2 plant stalks in their nostrils so their nose keeps its proper shape. Slap the skin on, suture it, dust it with licorice powder for some reason, and cover it with cotton. Sesame oil should be regularly applied until the skin is fully healed. If you're like me, I already do that by default, so it shouldn't be an issue. Finally, at long last, your sniffer is reborn. Don't worry, you still look like a freak. Just slightly less so. Moving on, our next surgery took place in 10th century Spain on Sancho I of Leon, otherwise known as Sancho the Fat. Now, normally, back in the day, having some meat on your bones was a sign of wealth and power and all that, but this guy was like TLC documentary tier, to the point where he could hardly function as a human being. So his constituents said, "Greetings, your thickness. Yeah, you can't be king anymore on account of you keep breaking every horse we give you, and nobody wants to wash between your accordion-like neck folds no more. After his adipose got him deposed, Sancho decided to seek medical help for his condition, under the oversight of well-reputed physician Hasdai ibn Shaprut, which is an anagram for paintbrush aids. Now, if there's one thing that medieval man understood, it's practicality. Lap band, gastric bypass, belly balloon, these all exist to help people who don't have the self-control to stop eating so much on their own. But Dr. Chapadut didn't believe in beating around the bush. He said, well, why don't we just stop the patient from shoving food into his own greasy maw in the first place? And decided to just up and stitch the dude's lips together. After the operation, the only nutrients that Sancho received came through a straw, in the form of a mixture known as thoraica, which was a complex blend of several herbs, fruits, and seeds, including opium. It was basically the closest thing you could find to lean at the time, and lean he became, losing around half his weight before ascending to the throne once more. So this is the part of the video where I pander to the desires of the audience. If there's one thing I know you internet people can't get enough of, it's things going inside people's eyeballs. Let's talk about cataract surgery. The art of dealing with people's clouded lenses has been around for millennia, believe it or not. That Susruta guy from earlier actually talked about the most common procedure for cataracts for most of civilized history, which is known as the couching method. Couching is done by taking a sharp object like a needle or a thorn, and ever so gently stabbing their eye hole at weird angles until the lens moves out of the way. No lasers, no sedatives, no paralytics, just a rusty old pin and some elbow grease, the way God intended. The majority of the time, this operation didn't work, usually just damaging the already blind eye irreparably. Shocker, right? And even if it did go as planned, you still, didn't have a lens in your eye, so you essentially went from, I can't tell if I'm dead or not, to, ah yes, it is quite yellow out today. By God. Something moved somewhere. A slightly more refined version of this operation is the suction method, which dates back to at least the 10th century AD, if not older. This procedure is described as requiring, quote, a large incision in the eye, a hollow needle, and an assistant with an extraordinary lung capacity. Though this reads like the setup to the world's most horrifying party trick, it's actually the bare minimum number of tools needed to completely extract the lens from the eye. In case you didn't pick up on how, here's a diagram. This method generally saw a greater success rate and fewer complications than its non-extracting counterpart. So hopefully you can sleep well tonight knowing that the number of human beings who have sucked a piece of somebody's living eyeball through a straw is above zero. Anywho, let's all just be thankful that we live in an era where procedures like these are a thing of the past. Now remember kids, even though the surgeries I described here do sound pretty easy to pull off, please don't try them at home. But if you do, please put it on LiveLeak afterwards. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and watch you for thanking. Wait, shit, I meant—
Hey kids, today I'll be discussing the alcoholic equivalents of the various allotropes of carbon. For those of you that don't know, an allotrope is just the various forms that carbon atoms can arrange themselves into. But anyway, let's get started. So amorphous carbon is like beer. It's the first form to ever be produced by humans, likely by accident. It's also the weakest form. It has a bunch of varieties, most of which taste terrible, and you need a whole lot of it if you want to have a good cookout. Graphite is like wine. It's almost as old as amorphous carbon, having been used by humans since ancient times. However, it's significantly stronger. Up until recently, only the rich could really get much enjoyment out of it, but today, most individuals can use it if they choose, but not all varieties are equal. Diamond is like vodka. First of all, it's very strong, the strongest form that's likely to be found in the average household. It's typically valued based on its purity and clarity, though flavored varieties do exist. Though it can be manufactured right here at home, most people seem to prefer it when it's from far-off lands. And remember never to use too much of it or else you might regret it later. Graphene is like brandy. It's similar to graphite in structure, but it's put through a process to make it more pure, and as a result, it's much stronger. Fullerenes are like absinthe. It's not as mainstream as the other varieties, mostly only being used by the intellectual types. It's also claimed to have a bunch of properties not shared by any other form out there. But despite all its hype, it has little real-world application currently. Finally, carbine is like pure alcohol. Despite its simplicity, it's extremely difficult to produce with current methods except in very small amounts. If you were to have a bunch of it, however, it would be more than twice as strong as diamonds. Hopefully, this forced analogy has been at least vaguely informational. But anyway, that's all for today. I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about a few slang words that I never understood. First is chicken legs. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm leaner than lean, so I've received this insult a couple times, hey, chicken legs. But chicken legs really aren't that skinny. Here's a diagram of my leg, right? And here's the average chicken leg. Look at that. I wish I had that kind of calf definition. That's sexy as fuck. There are bodybuilders with less meat on their bones than that. And considering the fact that most people have interacted with the drumstick at some point in their lives, I'm frankly dumbfounded that anyone ever thought to use this to refer to skinny people. Then there's socking someone. Hey man, I'm trying to think of a new slang word for punching someone in the face really hard. Like just destroying someone with your fists. Got any ideas? How about one of the softest, gentlest, and most unassuming objects found in one's entire house? That's like kicking someone in the dick and being like, whoa bro, you just got feathered. Fuck you, don't try to downplay my suffering. If anything, I got shin bashed in the dick bag. That's the proper level of vulgarity relative to the situation. Anyway, it would make a little more sense if you said gloved, because at least those are socks for your hands. But no, it's nonsense. Next is blow, in reference to cocaine. It's a form of air movement, so I guess this one is like half correct, but it could still lead to a lot of confusion. Yo, y'all wanna do some blow? Oh, gee whiz, well, okie dokie. Oh, I'm feeling it. It's kicking in. Oh, doggy, that's some nifty blow you got there, eh? Get out of my house. Next is nuts. When somebody is nuts, it means they're wild, they're crazy, they live life on the edge, right? What the fuck is so exciting about this? Finally, box. So box is a common slang word for one's lady bits, right? Now I've only been around 2 vaginas in my life. I came out of one of them when I was born, and I spent most of my time around the other one with my eyes closed, so my knowledge on that subject might be a little shaky. However, I have been around hundreds of thousands of boxes in my life. I know those inside and out, so that should make up for it. And let me tell you, these two things could not be less similar in shape. You see, boxes have corners. If your pussy has corners, you should probably start taking the tampons out of the container before you put them in. Likewise, if you compare the properties of either object, you'll notice that they're basically opposites in every way, so as a slang word, it's totally unfitting. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, let me ask you, do you watch the news often? Have you attended a school in your life? You ever look at a dollar? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then chances are you're familiar with at least a couple United States presidents. But if you're like me prior to last week, you've probably never heard of a United States emperor. Excuse me, good sir, but I should inform you that we're actually living under an emperor as we speak, at least according to my degree from the University of Reddit. Hey, that's great. Whoa, look over there. It's someone criticizing Elon Musk. And he's making typos. Anyway, let me tell y'all a story about a man named Joshua Norton. Norton was born in England at some point in the 1810s. Very little is known about the guy's younger years other than the fact that he spent most of his youth in South Africa as part of the UK's colonization programs. He came to San Francisco in 1849 with a modest amount of wealth to his name, and worked his way up in the real estate and commodities markets to become one of the city's wealthiest citizens. All was normal in the life of Mr. Norton, until one day when he got a little too big for his britches. You see, in 1852, China was facing a huge famine, so they completely banned the export of rice. Naturally, San Fran's rice price began to skyrocket in response to the reduced supply, peaking at 36 cents per pound. Norton saw this and decided to buy a $25,000 rice shipment from Peru at 12 cents per pound, thinking he'd corner the market. Keep in mind, that's around $750,000 in today's money. Little did he know, that wasn't the only shipment coming out of Peru, and by the time he was able to sell it, rice was already back down to 3 cents a pound. Now, according to my calculations, that put Norton at a net loss of a whole frickin' lot. He subsequently got into a years-long court battle with the vendor who sold him the shipment, which only cost him more money, and ultimately left the man destitute. So, Norton did what anybody would do after losing everything. He drank a nice hefty dose of fuck it all and said, you know what? The courts can eat my shorts, the house can eat my blouse, Peru can eat my shoe. I declare myself emperor of these United States. and I'm telling every newspaper in the city about it. And then he did. Now, the papers could have just been like, what a lunatic, and that would have been the end of it. But instead they said, you know what, this guy's kind of a meme. Let's publish his declaration, just for gits and shiggles. People across the city had their laughs, and Norton's rise to power began. From here, he issued several more commands to the media, and unlike nowadays, people loved having regular Norton updates shoved in their face. Among these announcements was a decree in 1859 to formally abolish the United States Congress. He also gave out a mandate to both the Protestant and Roman Catholic churches to formally ordain him as emperor. Although these edicts were ultimately ignored by the powers they were addressed to, they still served to build Norton's reputation around the city, and before long he was a fully fledged local celebrity. He was easily recognized by passerby, typically sporting a blue naval uniform and a beaver hat with a peacock feather in it. Pretty soon, Norton could expect to receive the royal treatment wherever he went. People started to address him formally on the streets, he got to ride public transport for free, and he even got occasional tax payments from people sympathetic to his impoverished living situation. Oh, and get this, Norton became so famous that toy stores in the city began selling dolls of the man for kids to play with. How many people can you think of that were so legendary that they got dolls made after them? You got Emperor Norton, Mr. T, and the bear that Teddy Roosevelt decided not to shoot. That's it, really. Also, though not backed by actual law in any way, his declarations came to be taken relatively seriously by the populace around him. For example, according to Norton, saying Frisco instead of San Francisco would be punishable by a $25 fine. Talk to any Frisco native and you'll find that this attitude survives to this day. With the help of a local printing firm, Norton even issued his own currency, which was actually accepted by many residents of the city, despite having no backing behind it whatsoever. In fact, a few Norton bucks are still floating around today as highly valued collector's items. I tried doing the same thing a while back, but unfortunately, Nella rubles are still only worth their weight in Nella rubles. Of course, it wasn't all magpies and molasses for our good friend Josh. He was once arrested by a policeman named Armand Barbier, who wanted to throw him in an asylum for his apparent insanity. Needless to say, when the public caught wind of this, they lost their fucking minds. Irate citizens wrote complaints in droves. All the newspapers published scathing editorials towards the police department. Stray cats were thrown into wood chippers. I don't have any evidence for that last one. I'm just, assuming based on what I would do in this scenario. Anyway, pretty soon, the chief of police got the memo, and Emperor Norton was released unscathed. Thankfully, Norton issued a royal pardon towards the man who arrested him, and from that point onward, whenever Norton passed a member of the force, they would stop and salute him. So, although in many ways he appeared godlike, Norton was but a mortal. And, as mortals sometimes do, Emperor Norton decided to drop dead on a street corner on January 8th of 1880. However, he left behind a legacy the likes of which most of us could only dream of. Beyond just the comedic value of his many exploits, Norton definitely had his prophetic moments, with some of his orders actually coming true decades after they were given. On multiple occasions, he ordered a bridge to be built between San Francisco and the Oakland Bay Area, which was eventually constructed in the 1930s. He also told people to form a League of Nations to uphold international interests. Unfortunately, a man yelling in California wasn't quite enough to convince the leaders of the world that such a thing was necessary. But who knows? Maybe little Nordo could have stopped World War I if he had been just a bit louder. I hope this tale has inspired some of you young impressionable kids out there, not because I expect any of you to succeed in the same way Norton did, but just because it's my personal belief that the world could always use more oddball vagrants. Wait a minute. Oddball vagrants. Product placement. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, it's That Happened Thursday, so it's time to learn some history. Today's lesson is on the weirdest 16th century Danish astronomist that you'll ever meet. Okay, that isn't saying much, but trust me, he's an interesting guy. Meet Tycho Brahe, or Brahe, or Broham, I don't really know, let me look it up. Alright, apparently I was right the first time, it's Tycho Brahe. Already you can see that something ain't quite right. He looks like Jamie Heinemann's gay cousin. So his claim to fame, among other things, is that he spent around 30 years collecting astronomical data with nothing but the naked eye, data that was later utilized by minds like Newton. However, if you think he just sat around staring at the sky all day like some kind of loser, then you're way off base. First off, besides the whole astronomer thing, Tycho was an immensely prominent noble for a long period of his life. It was to the point where he owned 1% of the entire wealth of Denmark at one point in the 1580s. Today, people like Bernie always talk about the 1%! Bitch, I am the 1%. Oh dear, I am somehow even more bald. Honestly, imagine a single scientist having that much money today. If you gave that kind of cash to Stephen Hawking, he would probably turn into Skynet. Beyond being a stargazing fat cat, though, Tico is also just a straight-up lunatic. Here's a story. So he got into a little scrap in his college years, right? That ended up in a sword duel where he lost part of the tip of his nose. You think he would have learned his lesson. But later on in his life, he somehow got himself into another sword duel, this time in the dark, and he lost the rest of his nose. Maybe that's where all the money came from, honestly. Just put out a bunch of nose insurance beforehand. Oh, it's already broken. I don't need the rest. Get myself into another fight. So finally he got himself fitted with a new brass prosthetic nose, which he wore for the rest of his life. But that's just the tip of the crazy iceberg. Tico, being fabulously well endowed, financially, get your mind out the gutter, one day decided to hire a dwarf for his court. Just to, do dwarf things, I guess. The guy's name was Jep, and Tico was in full belief that he could also tell the future. Hold on, I'm getting a vision. I see you giving more money to a little person. Oh, wow, must have happened. Ha ha, silly Jep. Damn. Seriously though, imagine one of today's astronomers pulling something like this. So, Mr. deGrasse Tyson, what discoveries have you made today? I've discovered something about myself, Steve. Go on. I want to own a dwarf. I want to call him Jeb and have him do dances for me and, be my footstool if I asked him nicely. What the fuck, Neil? Also, he should be psychic. What truly takes the cake, though, is Tico's pet elk. Yep, this walrus owned a caribou. Can't make that shit up. So one day, the next noble over wanted to borrow the elk to entertain guests at a party, right? So Tico sends the beast over to the other guy's manor. At the party, the elk gets pissed drunk, climbs up a staircase, falls down it, and dies. And dies. Knowing Tico, he was probably just like, well, no more moose, I'll buy another one, life goes on. So that's the story of Tico Brah. Remember, kids, eccentricity can get you far in life, but dwarf owning can get you even farther.
Hey kids, if I learned anything from my middle school career, it's that what may seem like a good idea initially will often be remembered only as a foolish mistake. Here's a few pieces of technology from yesteryear that have since fallen into total obscurity. So I've always believed that there's no point in having many small things when you can have one big thing. Why have many shrimp when you can have one lobster? Why drink many glasses of milk when you can eat one udder? Why have many cheese-its when you can have one cheese-them? Patent pending. And why have many street lights when you can have one moonlight tower? These guys were real popular back in the 1880s and 90s, often standing at over 150 feet tall and illuminating several blocks from a single point. Not very well, mind you. Matter of fact, they were so dim, we didn't even have the conscience to just call them light towers. Had to go and stick the moon on the front so people didn't get their hopes up. But thanks to our good old friend, the inverse square law, you still needed a fuck ton of light to pull this off. So they used incredibly harsh and UV emitting arc lights instead of incandescent bulbs. All the light of the moon and all the vision damage of the sun, talk about a win-win. Sadly, these beasts have fallen by the wayside over the past century or so, except for in Austin, apparently, but they use friendlier mercury vapor lamps in them, so they only get half points. Now, anyone who's been around a baby long enough knows they always have a cloud of ghoulish stench hovering around them. Jeez Louise, somebody better air out that musty little muskrat before grandma starts drooping again. You could stick him on the clothesline for a while, but knowing that little moron, I'm sure he'd find a way to hurt himself somehow. Introducing the baby cage. Finally, city dwellers all across the nation have a way of unleashing their postnatal funk on the unsuspecting passerby below. These were in vogue for a while before falling out of style a bit of the way into the 20th century, because apparently society started deeming babies more valuable than air conditioners. I don't really get it personally, but this is also around the time we started putting lead in gasoline, so it's probably for the best we kept them inside all day. Matter of fact, it's my firm belief that without kids growing up breathing lead, there's no way pet rocks would have taken off in the 70s. Wow, alienating baby boomers. He's so brave and controversial. Now, in the days between the Great War and the not as great but still pretty alright war, people were trying to find efficient means of detecting an incoming air attack. They climbed their nation's tallest mountains to seek the wisdom of their greatest elders, and the wise men said, big ears. So that's what they did. These giant discs were known as acoustic mirrors and were designed to focus incoming sound over a 5-meter diameter into a single point. They were reasonably effective as listening devices. A few of them in Britain were able to pick up the sound of a plane from all the way across the English Channel. Of course, radar came along soon after, rendering these things completely useless beyond looking brutalist as hell. For real, instant album cover material right here. Ah! One of the Pep Boys is pulling a Spanish Inquisition on this poor wayward harlot. Huh. Just kidding. Despite the fact that this looks so very much like a state-of-the-art instrument of torture, it's actually just a beauty micrometer. Think those shoe size measurer things at Foot Locker, only instead of one primitive measurement, it records the entire topology of your face and skull at once. With this data, a trained cosmetologist would be able to pinpoint exactly what features of your head should be enhanced and reduced with makeup in order to achieve a maximum calculated attractiveness after you've paid for their services. Clearly this device must have been effective. After all, beauty is entirely objective. What, eye of the beholder? Huh. Check the name tag, buddy. Apparently though, women didn't like being strapped into a birdcage and having their every minute flaw meticulously laid out in front of them, so this thing never really took off in the end. Next we have the Humlauf. This was a device made during World War II designed to let infantry shoot around corners. It's like the Germans sat down and watched that part in Tom and Jerry where the conniving rat bends the gun barrel back at his adversary. They said, "Mein Gott." They came in a variety of angles between 30 and 90 degrees, and even came with a little periscope so you could see what you were shooting at. But as we all come to find out when we reach adolescence, cartoons are the arbiters of deceit, because these things would invariably break within the first couple hundred shots or so. And even when they did work, the rounds would fucking explode from the massive acceleration, turning a deadly bullet into an ineffectual spray of shrapnel. These were so ineffective that only the 30-degree model ever saw significant production beyond prototypes, and even that was very limited. Say, you ever look at regular mousetraps and go, not enough property damage? Well, check this out. Patented in 1882, it's the revolver mousetrap, brought to you by the makers of the snail trebuchet and the cockroach claymore. Thanks to the marvels of the modern era, all those tiresome hours of intense varmint slang can be outsourced to one little gadget on the floor of your kid's playroom. Now when you hear a gunshot in the middle of the night, you can rest easy knowing that, one way or the other, there's one less pest for you to deal with in the morning. Boom. 1850. Steam locomotives are all the rage. You're in the transport business, but all you can afford is a couple dumb horses. Sure, they move things from point A to point B almost as well at a fraction of the cost, but your cool rail riding friends called you a whack-ass and it really hurt your feelers. Well, have we got the invention for you? The Impulsoria uses an ingenious system of treadmills to turn that horse to be beckoned into a force to be reckoned with. Sure, it's expensive as hell to make and limits your services entirely to railroads, but just look at it. Instant pussymobile. Slap some rims and a spoiler on that, you're laughing. This machine is recorded at having a maximum output of 2 to 4 horsepower, which sounds about right, and it didn't see much use outside a couple exhibitions. Now, if there's one hobby that people in the past enjoyed, it's smoking. Whoo boy did they like smoking. And with every great wholesome activity comes a million novelty items to go along with it. Everyone's seen the long cigarette, but how about the really long cigarette? Want to smoke in the rain? Here you go. Going snorkeling? Hey, you know what's more important than oxygen? Nicotine. But hey, wanna know the only thing better than a cigarette? 2 cigarettes. You know what? Fuck it. Have the whole pack. You earned it. Of course, if you're trying to cut back, you can always share it with a friend. Aw, how heartburning. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and check out this JPEG.
Hey kids, let me talk to you about dog breeding. Nowadays, dogs are mostly around just to be a cute companion, right? So breeding has gone from functionality to cuteness. And that's fine, as long as it stays within the bounds of nature. But that's not enough for today's breeder. So, how do you make a dog cuter? Apparently, by giving it disgusting genetic deformities. And chances are, you, the listener, agree with that. You just don't know you do. Let me show you what I mean. See this? This is a relatively normal dog. Notice the snout, the eyes, the shape of the head. Not too far gone from the wolves that today's dogs come from. Now let me take you through some other breeds. First is the Bull Terrier. 100 years ago, still looked pretty normal, right? Now here's today's version. Jesus! Who needs snouts, right? Let's just give it a long, continuous, boomerang-shaped head with 2 tiny holes at the end. Seriously, it looks like Toucan Sam is trying to fit inside a dog costume. And look at its eyes! They're permanently pointed up at the sky as if to say, God, why did you let me become this? Please kill me. Do you guys remember Spuds McKenzie, the old Bud Light mascot? Well, I just realized why they chose a Bull Terrier of all dogs. It's because he looked like his mom drank nothing but Bud Light for her entire pregnancy. Next up is the Pug. I'll probably get some hate for this one, but I don't care. They've been bred specifically to look like they've been smashed in the goddamn face with a frying pan. And because of this, because of their fact that their skull is shaped like a fucking tuna can, they can barely breathe their whole lives. Ever been around a pug? Constantly, no matter the temperature or the weather, they sit there going, "Gah, gah, gah, gah." And people think this shit is cute. If my baby came out with a flat nose, hair lip, cylindrical head, and no neck going, "Gah, gah, gah," I'd be like, Jesus fuck, put it back in. It's clearly not done yet. Next is the dachshund. Now there is no excuse for this one. The head's fine, right? But the body, good God. It's got a torso shaped like a goddamn doorstop with those pointless legs just kind of stapled on. Now it's been a little while since I reminded you what a normal dog looks like, so here. Now let me go into Photoshop real quick and do all the changes necessary to make this dog look like a dachshund. Look at that. That's not okay. Why even have legs at this point? Might as well just keep going until it's just a drumstick from the neck down. And there's no reason. It's just one day someone was like, well, people like dogs, and people like ferrets, so why don't we make some chimera abomination halfway in between the two, and see what happens. My least favorite breed, though, out of all of them, it's just straight up fucked in every way. A testament to humankind's never-ending corruption of the natural world. I'm talking about the Chihuahua. It's like somebody took a normal dog and boiled away every aspect except for anger and neuroticism, leaving this tiny hell creature behind. And this is one of the nicer pictures I could find. Take a look at this. Someone call a priest. And we let these things inhabit our homes. This poor woman's gonna wake up with her fucking nose chewed off and just be like, oh, Mr. Wiggles was a little hungry this morning, wasn't he? Meanwhile, the dog's just sitting there like, bloodlust. The only time they're not being needlessly aggressive towards people, it's when they're off pissing, shitting, and vomiting all over their surroundings. And you would think such a small dog would at least produce manageable waste, but much like the creature itself, the small things it does expel are straight up toxic. It's like some of the Chihuahua's pent-up hatred for the mortal plane manifests itself in every dump it takes. I would rather clean up a full-grown man's shit from my floor than wipe up the septic nightmare that is Chihuahua squirts. The only good thing about owning a Chihuahua is that if it ever gets rabies, it'll be fine, because you won't be able to tell the goddamn difference. It'll still be sitting there, business as usual. So that's my little rant about the monstrosities that live right beneath our noses. I'm Sam Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald, Hitler, all people who gained massive notoriety by killing one of history's famous leaders. But there are two Americans who committed an equally heinous crime as these three, yet their stories are seldom remembered, mostly because nobody really cares about the presidents they killed. Originally I was going to talk about both of them, but the video ended up being way too long, so today we'll just stick to, this one I guess. Charles J. Guiteau was a pretty silly guy, and to understand how a guy could be so silly, you gotta start with his youth. Guiteau was born in Freeport, Illinois in 1841. His mom had postpartum psychosis and died when he was 7, alongside 3 of his 5 siblings. His dad, meanwhile, was mega religious and made a big point out of instilling those values in his son, often physically. This influence molded Charles into a boy who sought nothing short of total approval from others, and who would react very harshly to any criticism levied upon him. As a teen, he moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan for high school. He tried to get into the University of Michigan, but he goofed on the entrance exam. So he did what anyone in his situation would do and said, well, so much for real life. I'm gonna join a commune. Specifically, he became part of the Oneida community in New York. In some aspects, this place was a pretty run-of-the-mill religious fellowship. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need, yada yada. But there were a couple of things that made it special. First off, they followed a doctrine known as Christian perfectionism, whereby everyone would strive to live their lives completely free of sin and reach a divine level of perfection while still on earth. Now this isn't really unique to Oneida, but whereas most people would achieve this through staunch discipline and careful self-reflection, these guys would just get together and take turns roasting the shit out of each and every member over any minute flaw they could possibly have. Real great for the psyche. They also practiced what was basically an early form of eugenics, where aspiring parents would have to submit an application and be judged by the committee on their moral and spiritual fortitude. If they were allowed to mate, children would be separated from the mom about a year after birth and raised communally in the children's wing. After all, wouldn't want any of those hopelessly flawed toddlers to think they're deserving of any affection whatsoever. Oneida also believed in what they called free love, which meant that anyone could bang anyone at any time, as long as they kept it hetero, and exclusive relationships of any kind were actually frowned upon, which seems like kind of a weird habit for people trying to 100% FC this whole Christianity thing, but whatever. But wait, you're saying, how can you have selective breeding at the same time as extremely unselective breeding?
breeding. Aha! See, that's where male continence comes in. Under this rule, a pair could go at it for as long as they wanted, with the caveat that the dude's not allowed to nut, pull out or otherwise. That way, it's not a sin. After all, as the Bible says, if the dick don't spit, you must acquit. Paradoxically, no such rule existed for the women. In fact, not only did the commune believe in female orgasms, they actually prioritized them, which is like unheard of in the 19th century. They'd even have the middle-aged women of the society train the teen boys in the art of holding in the old pelvic sneeze. That way, there wouldn't be any chance of conception in case the guy goofs up his first few tries. So anyway, young Gito joins this whole thing, and endured countless blows to his massive yet fragile ego, thinking he's at least gonna get a piece of this communal action. Except, the criticism towards him wasn't just a formality like it was for others. Everyone there genuinely fucking hated him, on account of the fact that he was a raving neurotic narcissist. He never caught a single piece of this allegedly free love, and after a while, they all started calling him Charles Get Out in the hopes that he'd leave. This is real. And after 5 long years of this abuse, Gito finally got the hint and moved to New Jersey. He tried starting a newspaper themed around the Oneida religion called the Daily Theocrat, except nobody cared, so that failed. He went back to Oneida and tried to sue the place in order to get back pay for all his voluntary unpaid labor while living there, but apparently I'm mad butthurt isn't a valid reason for prosecution, so that went nowhere. Finally he said, well, when your devotion to God has failed you, there's only one path in life left. Time to become a lawyer. He managed to pass an examination to gain admission to the Illinois bar, and subsequently joined a law firm in Chicago at the age of 27, where he met his soon-to-be wife, one Annie Bunn. Of course, Gito never really got to be a lawyer. He only argued in one actual court case. Most of his time was spent doing bill collection for random clients. This job gave him insight into how debtors think and operate, which allowed him to turn into quite the con man, dodging bills whenever and wherever he saw the opportunity. Even on the job, he'd frequently charge exorbitant contingency fees after the fact, upwards of 75%. And sometimes he'd just keep it all and completely ghost his clients. After all, what are they gonna do? Send another bill collector? Well, it turns out they did, so Gito and his wife fled to New York. Here he ditched law and started getting into politics. Specifically, he wrote and delivered a speech in favor of Horace Greeley, the 1872 Democratic presidential candidate. And he somehow got it in his head that if Greeley won, his campaign would be so greatly indebted to him that they'd fulfill his desires to be the Minister of Chile, as though a total rando like him could just, name a job and it would be his. In reality, the speech was an incoherent mess heard by next to no one, and Greeley lost by a landslide. As the years passed, Annie got real sick of living life on the run with a broke-ass bitch, and Charles was none too keen on her weighing him down either. But back in the day, you couldn't just divorce someone willy-nilly, you needed a valid reason for it. So Charles concocted the brilliant scheme of banging a prostitute and then having her testify in court. The plan worked, with the pair successfully divorcing in 1874, and the only downside was syphilis. Whoops. Gito started dabbling in theology again around this time. He published a book called The Truth, which was almost entirely plagiarized directly from John Noyes, the founder of the Oneida community. But despite being a man of God, Gito was still very much a two-time varmint, and moved frequently in the dead of night to keep collectors off his tail. His brother caught wind of this and wrote him a letter basically saying, hey, maybe you should pay your bills now and then so you can be, a functioning member of society. To which Charles replied, and I quote, find $7 enclosed. Stick it up your bunghole and wipe your nose on it, and that will remind you of the estimation in which you are held by Charles J. Guiteau. God damn. And to his own brother, the madman. Soon after, he got arrested, bailed out by his sister, lived with her for a few months, attacked her with an axe, went to DC, rambled about religion to anyone who would listen, moved to Boston, got in a boat accident where everyone in his boat was fine, but everyone in the other one fucking died, took this as a sign from God, moved back to New York, and got back into politics in 1880, this time as a Republican. During this campaign, there were two main factions of Republicans, known as the Stalwarts and the Half-Breeds, which sounds like some Tolkien shit, wish we had names like that today. Now, Guiteau considered himself a stalwart, and in a similar vein to his 1872 venture, he wrote a speech to promote stalwart candidate Ulysses S. Grant, who was shooting for his third term. But before he got a chance to deliver the speech, one James A. Garfield took the candidacy completely out of nowhere, beating out both factions single-handedly. He was like, rats, how am I gonna get power handed to me now? So he literally just scribbled out all the references to Grant and replaced them with Garfield and was like, yep, that'll do it. He read this speech all of twice, along with handing out copies to the Republican National Committee. In reality, this really didn't accomplish much, but when Garfield managed to win the election, Guiteau was like, yes! That was entirely me! Garfield is in my supreme debt. As God is my witness, he shall make me a consulate in Vienna or Paris or someplace cool like that. He went to DC to await his inevitable appointment, but obviously nothing happened. So he started writing letters. A lot of letters. When that didn't work, he started actually stalking both Garfield and the Secretary of State, James Blaine, intercepting them in hotel lobbies, just being like, oh hey, yeah, it's me, the sole person responsible for your success. Say, how about a consulship? Alright, you'll get back to me, I get it. Whoa, haha, what a coincidence. Me again. How's that consulship coming? At first they simply ignored him, but eventually Blaine snapped, screaming, never speak to me again on the Paris consulship as long as you live.
Damn you, Garfield!
I sense a disturbance in the force. Maybe daylight savings just made Monday an hour longer. Wow, Garfield, that was quite the wisecrack. It's amazing how you managed to keep things fresh year after year. Burn in hell, beige dog. At this point, Guiteau completely renounced any faith in the current administration, and after a lifetime of clout chasing met only with disappointment, he decided his only option was straight up going postal. He convinced himself that it was now God's will to remove Garfield from this mortal plane in order to put his stalwart vice president Chester Alan Arthur into power. When he went to buy a revolver, he was given the choice between a wood grip and an ivory grip. He went with the ivory one for no other reason than he thought it would look cooler in a museum, and on July 2nd, 1881, he ambushed Garfield at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, shooting him twice in the back and mortally wounding him, all because he wouldn't give him a job. Garfield managed to hang on for 11 weeks before finally dying, which sounds like hell. Today's modern physicians actually believe that Garfield could have easily survived the incident if it weren't for doctors digging through him with unsanitized tools. Hey modern medicine, thanks for not being worse than literally no medicine. It means a lot. But that didn't stop Guiteau from being formally charged with murder. And that's exactly what he wanted. Matter of fact, Guiteau was over the moon, taking his new nationwide infamy as the fame he always deserved. His trial was just bananas, with Guiteau hurling obscenities at just about everyone there, including his own defense team, and formatting his testimony as an epic poem which he recited in full. He even dictated an autobiography to the New York Herald, which, get this, he ended with a personal ad for a nice Christian lady under 30 years of age. What a baller. When the guilty verdict was read, he called everybody there low consummate jackasses, and on June 30th, 1882, Guiteau smiled and waved to his adoring fans as he was walked to the gallows, where he recited a repetitive, deranged poem he wrote that morning, which was performed in a high-pitched falsetto voice, since it was written in the point of view of a child. He asked for a full orchestra to play during the reading, which I don't have to tell you that went nowhere, and promptly thereafter, he was hung. When the gallows dropped, people were probably like, ugh, Jesus, it's finally over. I just came here for a nice little execution. They subject me to all that? I want my money back, frankly. So it just goes to show, you can't always get what you want. Unless that thing is getting everyone to hate you, that's extraordinarily easy. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I oop and I oop.
Hey kids, I've been told by a lot of people that there's nothing more exciting than the metric system. They may have a point, but I can still prove them wrong. Today, we're going to talk about some specific lesser-known units of measurement. First is the Schmidt Pain Index. Now, anybody could tell you that getting stung by a bug tends to hurt, but just how much does one sting hurt compared to another? Are yellow jackets worse than hornets? Are fire ants worse than honeybees? Nobody in the world of science knew for sure. That is, until a young upstart by the name of Justin Schmidt decided to boldly go where no entomologist has gone before. But how did he plan to quantify the level of pain caused by different insect stings? Well, it went something like this. Alright, honeybee. Zzz, ow, God, that hurt. I'll give that like a 2. Next, paper wasp. Zzz, ah! Okay, that's like a 3. Next, let's try bullet ant. Jesus Christ, Mary Mother of Satan's left nipple, it's like my hand is made entirely out of urethras, and each and every one is having a red-hot catheter put in and ripped out 5 times every second. My very being is on fire. My only desire left is for death himself to bless me with sweet relief. I'll give that a 4. No. 4+. In all seriousness though, I'm pretty sure the index is meant to be logarithmic like earthquake magnitudes. So just like a magnitude 7 earthquake is 10 times as powerful as a magnitude 6, a bullet ant sting causes 100 times as much pain as a honeybee. In total, Schmidt cataloged 78 different species of the order Hymenoptera, which includes ants, bees, and wasps. You can tell a man is really dedicated to his job when, after getting stung by 77 insects, he says to himself, you know what? That wasn't enough. I need one more creature to inject its venom into me, and only then will this list be complete. I guess you could say he just really gave a Schmidt. Nah. Next is the Waffle House Index. So for those of you that didn't know, the Waffle House is one of the most resilient establishments in the world. Whereas most restaurants would simply close down in the event of, say, a hurricane, Waffle House just goes from their normal mode to disaster response mode, following extensive protocol that allows that location to keep serving customers in spite of low food supply or even a power outage. In response to this business practice, FEMA came up with what is known as the Waffle House Index, which is a system to easily assess how badly an area is damaged by a natural catastrophe. If the Waffle House is fully open, they're in the green, which means things are basically fine. If the Waffle House is using their low supply menu, you're in the yellow, which means that the area is almost certainly mid-disaster. Finally, if you're in the red, that means the Waffle House is either closed or gone. Now that's a sign of some real nuclear zombie holocaust type shit going down, so if you're not already dead, you should probably vacate the area. Most engineers could tell you that, structurally speaking, the triangle is the strongest of all shapes. But I believe that there's one shape that's even stronger. Godspeed, Waffle House. Next we have the APGAR score. So the APGAR score is a rating system used by hospitals to determine how healthy a newborn baby is on a scale from 0 to 10. It's called APGAR based on its 5 criteria, which include appearance, pulse, grimace, activity, and respiration. And each of these is rated on a scale from 0 to 2 to get your final score. Personally, I think this set of standards is a little flawed. Here's an example. Well, it's completely blue, and it doesn't really want to move at all, but it's got a really fast heartbeat, and it's screaming really loudly. I'd give this baby like a 6 out of 10. That's good enough. So in response, I've invented my own rating system. It's called the Ragu score. R is for reflexes. It's common knowledge that if you hold any healthy baby by its feet and then drop it, it'll always land upright. If your baby can't do that, that's a sure sign that it's defective. A is for abnormality. If your baby seems weird, that's typically a good indicator that it's weird. G still stands for grimace, just like in the APGAR test, only instead of looking at the baby's facial expression, you just bring grimace from McDonald's into the room and see how the baby reacts. If it starts crying, that's a good sign because grimace is absolutely fucking terrifying. And finally, U is for ugliness, just because that might sway your decision on whether or not you want to keep it. Now, if the baby passes the test, it gets to go home, but if it fails, then it gets shipped off to the factory and made into Ragu, hence the name of the test. Some people might be upset by this fact, but you know what they say, pray-go today, Ragu tomorrow. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, so we all know that, as far as living things go, humans win, not even a contest. But it turns out, if you hop to the next genome over and look real carefully, you can actually see a basic version of a lot of the stuff that makes us so great. Here's some stories about what chimpanzees can get down to in the right context. Talking about chimp tails. Now, North Korea's Pyongyang Central Zoo has a colorful history, from its humble beginnings as literally just 50 badgers in a fence, to the parrot they taught to recite poetry praising Kim Il-sung, to being the only place in Pyongyang where you can look at a dog legally. It seems the only thing that's remained constant throughout this zoo's life is that it's fucking depressing. Fortunately, both workers and animals alike found ways to cope, one of which is smoking. Azalea the chimp is currently 13 years old and is one of the shining stars of Pyongyang Zoo, purely for her ability to burn through over a pack a day. Now, I like a good old-fashioned smoking chimp as much as the next guy, but whereas most zookeepers would probably try to talk her out of something so unhealthy, the North Korean ones actually gave her supplies, just like, feeling trapped, welcome to the club, pal. Her skills are actually pretty impressive. Not only can she use it later, but in a pinch, she also knows that old schoolyard trick of lighting one ciggy with the other. Just a shame that her mind wasn't put towards something a little more healthy or productive. Nah, you know what? That's pretty dope, actually. I'm happy with that. Flashback to 1954. A chimp named Congo was born in the London Zoo. Little did anybody know, this ape was a prodigy. Out of curiosity, one of his zookeepers, named Desmond Morris, decided to give Congo a pencil and a piece of cardboard to see what he'd do. Almost immediately, he started drawing some rudimentary lines and shapes. Morris was like, whoa, and decided to let him try painting on for size. And what he saw was incredible. Congo created these beautiful renderings with a blend of realism and self-expression that would make even the great masters stare in awe. Nah, just fucking with you, they're garbage. But for a non-human, there's still something to be appreciated here. Congo had at least a very basic sense of composition. Like, you can see there's some balance to the images. Matter of fact, when his handler would make shapes on one side of the page, Congo would deliberately mark up the other side to maintain some kind of symmetry. He also had an artist's sense of self-entitlement, because whenever his owner tried to take away a picture before Congo thought it was finished, he'd literally go apeshit, all throwing a fit and screaming till they gave it back. But hey, painting done by a chimp. You know who likes pointless novelties like that? The incredibly rich.
bitch. In 2005, 3 of Congo's paintings were up for auction next to works by 2 obscure little artists known as Andy Warhol and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. And while the 2 actual artist pieces went completely unsold, these 3 beauties got picked up for the scant price of over 25,000 US dollars. And the guy was like, wow, I felt something for a second there. I really like the watermark on this, by the way. Like, this is my painting done by a chimp. Anyway, next we have this beast called Washoe. Washoe was the first non-human creature to learn to communicate through sign language. That's right, eat shit, Coco. Prior experiments in chimp communication had attempted to teach him some basic spoken language, but after realizing that chimps are physically incapable of making most of the noises we do, they decided signing would be the better option. Washoe was raised in an environment similar to what a human child would experience, complete with toys, clothes, chores, and even being allowed to sit at the dinner table, in spite of what the Bible clearly says about that. The scientists raising Washoe made sure to only communicate in American Sign Language around her, in the hopes of establishing a true conversational rapport. Initially, they took a traditional Pavlovian approach by rewarding proper use of a new sign with food and tickles. But there were a couple problems with this. Firstly, the simple action reward setup meant that Washoe didn't have to really understand the words she was signing, the same way a parrot saying I love you in a YouTube video always does it with those cold, unfeeling eyes. Secondly, Washoe would break into a laughing fit whenever they tickled her, to the point where the lesson would be essentially over. So the researchers abandoned this and instead just let her learn through observation of her caretaker signing, with much better results even in the total absence of reward stimuli. And the only downside was that the job title of designated chimp tickler ceased to exist. In total, Washoe learned around 350 individual signs in ASL, and she'd even use these to formulate novel phrases for new objects. Like one time she wanted to talk about a thermos, but didn't know what a thermos was. She goes, metal cup drink. Hey, scat! A similar story comes from a chimp named Lucy, who was raised by one Dr. Maurice Temerlin and his wife, Jane. The tale of Lucy's life is why this woman is now officially the 3rd most famous woman named Jane who worked with apes. In the same vein as Washoe, the pair attempted to gain some insight into Lucy's weird chimp noggin by raising her like you would a human. You know, dressing herself, using silverware, making tea, looking at magazines, pretending she knows what a word is, all that jazz. But as Lucy matured, things took an ugly turn. For one, since she was brought up in a basically human environment, she eventually discovered the time-tested human pastime of alcohol. The pair would leave bottles of gin around their home with Lucy, which, I don't know how you'd make this mistake twice, but it was apparently a common occurrence for them to leave her alone for too long and come back like, honey, I think the monkey's fucking wasted. Again. Another one of her hobbies was sculpting crude human heads out of poop. Her own poop, to be clear. They also left some copies of Playgirl magazine around for Lucy to flip through, which she became very fond of. So fond, in fact, that she was caught multiple times, having relations with the vacuum cleaner. I don't understand the mechanics of it, cause no source I found ever went into detail, and believe me, I wanted to know as much as you do. All I know is that, all things considered, some pretty exemplary tool use there. So the pair saw this and they were like, alright, we gotta get this chimp laid, and fast. But the problem was, Lucy was conversing with people, eating with people, flicking the old chimp bean to people, so it's not a stretch to think that Lucy thought she was people. So imagine you're people, and you get thrown into an enclosure with a full-grown, horny male chimp. You'd have a fucking panic attack. And that's just what Lucy did. As the years went on, Lucy got more and more violent, regularly trashing the place to get out the frustration of not being able to comprehend what was so fundamentally unnatural about her existence. Finally, the couple had had enough and decided to take Lucy to a primate rehabilitation center in the Gambia, with the hopes that she could be forced to acclimate to primate life. She could barely cope with it at first, getting real depressed and hardly associating with the other apes. Which you'd be depressed too if you had to give up a life of American luxury complete with booze and vacuum fornicating to go live with chimps in the wild. But with the help of a graduate student named Janice, Lucy eventually came to accept her fate, and although she'd never mate with another of her kind, she ended up getting along with her troop well enough. About a year after leaving the rehab center, Janice came back to visit, and Lucy gave her a warm embrace before waddling back to the rest of the chimps. Aww. Then Lucy got poached like a fucking egg, which kinda puts a damper on the whole happy ending, but you know. Whatever. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I fell down the stairs this morning.
Hey kids, whether you're a precocious young lad down by the swimming hole or a grizzled crime scene investigator, everybody's got some interest in dead bodies. Yes, from Weekend at Bernie's to Weekend at Bernie's 2 to Weekend at Bernie's 3 Revelations, stories about wayward corpses have certainly carved their niche in today's media. So, I thought I'd spin a few yarns about some real life people who were kept out far past their expiration date. Our first tale follows one Elmer McCurdy. He was an outlaw during the twilight days of the Wild West. Thanks to his former life as a miner, McCurdy acted as the demolitions expert to his little posse, using nitroglycerin basically anytime he had the faintest excuse to do so. Except he was kind of a moron, so it didn't usually go quite as planned. Gotta say, after peanut butter and chocolate, my favorite combination of two things is probably gross incompetence and high explosives. Example, in March of 1911, McCurdy's band of rabble-rousers found out that $4,000 were in a safe in an approaching train. They managed to stop the entire locomotive, I don't even know how you do that, break in, hold everyone on board hostage, and locate the safe. McCurdy steps up to plate, right? Gotta blast the thing open, except I guess the excitement kinda got to him, because he ended up using like way too much nitroglycerin, like inordinate amounts. Ended up completely destroying the safe and its contents, and what few silver coins they made out with were literally melted to the frame of this safe and had to be peeled off. Anyway, he died in a shootout with police later that year, and the undertaker at the funeral home he was sent to couldn't find any next of kin on account of McCurdy being a rambling low-life varmint, so he just embalmed the hell out of him and said, "Hey boys and girls, want to see a dead criminal? Only one shiny nickel." And since LiveLeak wasn't around at the time, there weren't many places a kid could go to stare at a corpse for a while if he or she so desired, so it actually became a pretty popular attraction. Visitors would pay their dues by physically slipping the coin into the man's mouth, and the creepy-ass undertaker would come fish him out later, probably with bare hands all slowly and sensual-like. A few years passed when a couple of guys showed up claiming to be McCurdy's brothers, with a note from the local sheriff to back it up. They told the undertaker they had permission to go bury McCurdy, so he reluctantly relinquished the body to the men. Except, these guys weren't his brothers. They were just a couple of crusty freaking carnies. They shipped the body off to Kansas to become an attraction in their traveling show. From here, McCurdy traded hands a few more times. At one point, he was exploited for this one guy's film about narcotics. It was like, yeah, this pill-popping degenerate got shot while trying to rob a pharmacy for more dope the other day. The body was super old by then, so people are like, wait, why is he all desiccated and flaky and gross? He just goes, yep, that's what happens when you do drugs, kids. Your fucking skin falls off. Stay above the influence. At some point in his journey, he ended up getting coated in wax and paint to look a little less rotty, before ending up in a warehouse in 1949. Here's the thing, he was in there alongside some actual wax figures, and after spending 19 years in storage, nobody knew he was a real corpse anymore, so he ended up getting sold in 1968 as a mannequin to one Spoonie Singh, owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum. He tried to lend the guy out a couple times during his stay, but people found him too gross or unrealistic looking for whatever purposes they had in mind. So he ended up getting sold again and used as a prop of a hanged man at the Pike Amusement Zone in their Funhouse ride, with zero knowledge that he was an actual dead criminal. It wasn't until 1976, 65 years after his death, that an episode of The $6 Million Man was being filmed at the complex, and a stagehand tried to move the prop around only to have its arm break off in his hand. He was like, ugh, lousy stiff. Wait a minute, that's curious. This mannequin's got human flesh and bones inside of it. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. 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 The autopsy confirmed what everyone present at the time suspected. By this point, the body was so dried out and stale that it only weighed 50 pounds, which makes me think we should start a radical new fad diet where we just get people to mummify parts of their body. Like, Jenny, guess what? I just lost 30 pounds in 5 days. Wow, holy heck, how'd you do that? They call it the Egyptian cleanse. Anyway, with that, McCurdy was finally laid to rest back in his homeland of Oklahoma, and that film crew's lives were never the same again. Flashback to late 18th century.
Baloney.
There lived a physician by the name of Luigi Galvani. This guy was a big deal. He's the dude who discovered that, hey, animals got electricity in them. And his legacy still survives today in words like galvanize. One of his most famous experiments was the one where he used static electricity to make frog legs twitch on command. Around these parts, we call that the French salute. Stereotypes funny. Well, in 1803, his nephew, Giovanni Aldini, said, hey, that's pretty nifty and all, but what if we tried it on people? So the city of London was like, hey, now you're thinking with portals. One freshly executed criminal coming up. Aldini gathered a crowd and applied 2 diodes to the corpse's head, causing his face to scrunch up and one eye to flick open. Aldini was a showman though, he wanted some real action, so he then put the current through opposite points in the body, which made the whole thing flail around like Pinocchio in heat. Now today we know he was just exciting the dead muscles, right? But the people who were watching had no idea what was going on, so they were like, Jesus Christ, this guy's a fucking necromancer. necromancer. Quick, go get grandma, maybe we can get in the will after all. Fun fact, this experiment actually ended up serving as inspiration for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which makes me wonder what other famous novels were based on real life events. Was a white whale ever pursued by a vengeful sea captain? Was there actually a mentally handicapped migrant worker who liked hugging rabbits to death? Was there ever a human soul as profoundly asinine and willfully ignorant as Amelia Bedelia? God, I hate her glassy-eyed face so fucking much. I just want to mash it into a running waffle maker, be like, huh, isn't that ironic? Grab her by her vacant fucking head, throw her out of a 747 and say, hey, why didn't you shoot yourself when you had the chance? Get it! By the way, this video ended up being way too long, so stay tuned for part 2 in a week or two. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, as you know, many people struggle with weight management. Usually that means they can't keep the pounds off, but if you're like me, you might struggle with the opposite problem. Seriously, this drawing is only a slight exaggeration. So, I'm gonna teach you how to turn that dank lankin into skank bankin. Quick disclaimer, I am not a nutritionist, I'm mostly talking out my ass here, but I'm reasonably sure that most of the claims I make in this video are factually correct. Alright, let's do this. Tips Tuesday! Tip number 1, eat a da meat. It builds muscle. You know why? 'Cause it is muscle. I'm talking the beef, the pork, the chickie. It's all good. There is no better source of dense protein out there. Tip number 2, peanut butter. Any nutritionist can tell you that a balance of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats is necessary for a healthy diet. Peanut butter is that balance. Very calorie dense as well, about 90 in each tablespoon. You're gonna wanna opt for chunk style rather than smooth, as it is closer to raw peanuts. Tip number 3, no coffee. But Sam, you say, I need the coffee for my energy. Well, guess what? That's a bunch of pussy bullshit. A man should be running on pure willpower alone. Coffee is a stimulant that makes you waste energy. It makes you poop, waste the nutrients. And it's an appetite suppressant, so you can't stuff your gut as good. Tip number 4, supplement with fats. Making spinach? That's good. It's got the nutrients. But it's also got like 6 calories total. Throw a tablespoon of butter on top of it, and suddenly you up to 106 calories. Don't go with just butter though, it might turn you into a racist. I'm Paula Deen. Instead, diversify your oils. Olive, peanut, coconut, especially coconut, pop that shit on potato, that's the fazool. Just don't drink crude oil or else you will die. Or turn into a billionaire, but I wouldn't risk it. Tip number 5, milk. It's like water, except better, 'cause it's got proteins and lactose. But Sam, I don't want my friends seeing me drinking milk, that's what children do. I will punt you over my house, 'cause that is more pussy bullshit. They might laugh now, but they won't be laughing once they see your sick gains. Just don't drink milk all the time. You could die. Okay, probably not, but milk is not too good a hydrator, so just drink water too. Do both. Both is good. Tip number 6, eggs. Protein good for chicks. Protein good for attracting chicks. Now the egg consists of 2 parts, as you know, the yolk and the white, also known as the albumin. However, the Al Pacino is not nearly as dense as the yolk as far as calories and proteins are concerned. So if you wanted to get technical, you could ditch the Alpine Ridge and just eat the yolks. You won't miss out on much as the pair have similar protein contents, just the Al-Qaeda also has a lot of water weight. In conclusion, egg whites are for gays. That's why they look like jizz. Tip number 7. Hey Junior, what you drinking there? Pepsi? Are you shitting me? Tip number 7, no sodas. They contain empty calories for one. Secondly, carbonation is a waste of space. Produces gas, wastes valuable stomach space, so you can't eat as much. You know why they call it pop? It's 'cause I'll pop a cap in your ass if I catch you drinking it. Tip number 8, most important, exercise. This is the sole tip that separates the fit fucks from the fat fucks. Obviously you're gonna want to lift, but you should definitely get some cardio in there as well. But Sam, you say, everybody knows that cardio kills gains. I will punt you into the stratosphere because that is more, say it with me, pussy. Bullshit. Sure, an hour of jogging might lose you 400 calories, but you also get all of these benefits. So follow these tips and you'll be swole in no time. I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, it's That Happened Thursday. So today I'll discuss where different religious symbols come from. First up is Christianity. As most of you know, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified despite being supposedly sinless, so the cross is representative of his martyrdom. Personally, I always thought choosing the cross of all things to signify the whole religion was at least a little silly. Right, my prophet, he was a great dude, spread peace and love all along the land, performed many bountiful miracles, and then right at the end, he fell face first into a fucking bear trap and died. So that's our symbol, whole religion bear trap. Peace, love, compassion, and bear trap. Next up is the Jewish Star of David. It's been used now and then since the 11th century, but it only really got popular around the 1800s. There's no real special meaning behind it. They really just took a random symbol that was kind of around, called the hexagram, and made it their own. Bro, check out my new religious symbol. I'm pretty sure you didn't come up with that. Pretty sure that's a thing elementary schoolers do in their notebook when they're bored. Nah man, not once it gets popular. Then everybody will think of my religion when they see it. Whatever floats your boat. Jimmy, what is this in your notebook? Oh, it's just a little doodle. Jimmy, listen to me. We are Catholics. Now get over here and erase this blasphemy. But Mom, Now! Next is Islam. So, the star and crescent actually used to represent the Ottoman Empire, which ruled over most of the Islamic world during the 1800s. However, the empire dissolved after World War I, and its symbol was later adopted to represent Islam as a whole around the 1970s. Hey Rob, guess what? I'm starting a new baseball team. Isn't that the Chicago Cubs logo? Oh please, they're barely even a team. When's the last time they did anything? Nobody's using this symbol because nobody wants to buy their merchandise. Perfectly good logo. I'm taking it for my team. Couldn't that lead to a bit of confusion? Only because they'll see a guy in a Cubs jersey who can actually catch a pop fly. Next up is Taoism. Alright, so the yin-yang, or as they call it, the Taijitu, actually applies to a lot of Asian religions. Just, the Taoists use it as their primary symbol today. It originated in China, dating back to the 11th century AD. Although it's had a lot of different looks over the years, it's always represented the same idea of balance between contrasting forces in the world. Okay, Carl, balance of good and evil. Let's see your design. Not bad, not bad. Alright, what about you, Steve? What the hell is that? Oh, well, you said balance between good and bad in the world, so I drew a grilled cheese sandwich shaking hands with a razor blade covered dildo. What? Okay, all other questions aside, why is a grilled cheese the best thing you could think of? Have you ever had a grilled cheese? Like a real one with butter just smeared all over it, crust nice and crispy, sprinkle some onions in there, get out. Okay. So you know how when people are meditating in movies, they do that obnoxious Om thing? Well, apparently Om is actually the name of the popular Hindu symbol, and repeating its name aloud is said to be a sacred incantation, which is why it's said during things like rituals or yoga. The actual meaning behind the symbol is said to represent a load of different things depending on who you ask or when. Basically, whatever your purpose is, it's a one-size-fits-all prayer. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty. This is taking forever. No, you know what? I'm gonna make my own religion, yeah. And our prayers, one syllable long. We're just gonna go ood whenever we feel like praying. That's it. Dinner table, ood! But how will you get any meaning out of that? It's my own word. I can give it whatever meaning I want. So I'll just give it all the meanings. It'll mean the soul, it'll mean the universe, it'll mean I don't have to recite any more long-winded bullshit. Anyway, pass the corn. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. At some point I'll do a second video covering some of the more obscure religious symbols. But until tomorrow, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about the bombardier beetle. So here's what he looks like, right? Already you can tell he's kind of a prick. He just looks like an ant that one day decided to stick a sunflower seed on his back, thinking he's all creative, like, yeah, I'm original now. I'm my own insect. Got the junk in the trunk for the ladies, no big deal. That's just the picture Wikipedia shows, though. There are a bunch of other species of bombardier, most of which look a little more unique, so I'll give him some credit. The cool thing about the bombardier beetle, though, has nothing to do with appearance. It's actually the fact that this creature has some pretty awesome weaponry up its sleeve. The beetle is actually capable of shooting a a foul-smelling chemical spray from its back end. And it doesn't even have to eat Chipotle beforehand, am I right, ladies? Anyway, the spray contains, among other things, a compound called 1,4-benzoquinone, which is quite irritating to vulnerable tissue, like eyes or mouths. Couple that with the fact that the mixture comes out at a temperature close to the boiling point, and you've got a pretty gangster arthropod on your hands. One could liken the bombardier beetle to the common Tumblr feminist. Whenever it feels even slightly threatened, it starts pulling shit out of its ass in an effort to be as unnecessarily inflammatory as possible. Even more interesting than the spray itself, though, is the way the beetle pulls it off. It starts out with two different substances, hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone, each of which is stored in a separate reservoir in the body. Then whenever the bombardier gets his jerrys in a jostle, he releases either chemical into a single chamber. Once they mix, these chemicals react violently with one another, producing a bunch of heat and gas. The pressure from the gas is what propels the liquid out of the chamber and into the face of anything nearby. Fortunately for the bombardier, the pressure also seals off the entrances to the reservoirs, so as to stop the thing from, blowing itself up. As soon as the pressure's released, though, the valves reopen, and the process can be repeated. And this whole cycle takes place within the course of a couple milliseconds, meaning the average beetle could fire anywhere from 5 to 20 blasts within a fraction of a second. Once this video's over, you guys should look up some slow-mo videos of the bombardier in action. I can't show you here because of copyright and all, but it's pretty cool, so go check it out. Anyway, though, this system of using pressurized gases both to launch projectiles and to regulate the chambering process is actually somewhat similar to how guns like the AK-47 work, so I thought it was pretty neat how this creature managed to evolve something so mechanical in nature. I just hope the NRA doesn't catch wind of these guys. If the government takes away our chemical weapons, only the bombardier beetles will have chemical weapons. Then what, man? Then what? Hey, do you guys remember how the Flintstones always used to use animals as tools? Like that pelican cement mixer, it's all living. Well, it's a shame the writers didn't know about the bombardier beetle, because it would fit right in with their primitive shenanigans. Wilma's walking home late at night, right? Hear someone sneaking up on her, hand on her shoulder, bam! Prehistoric pepper spray. Then when he's down, she whips out the eel, bam! Prehistoric taser. He thinks it's over, little does he know, she's got a cicada on a string around her neck. Bam! Prehistoric rape whistle. Police come, take him to jail, he serves his sentence, after a while he gets granted parole, things finally looking up for him, and that's when they stick the parrot on his shoulder. Bam! Prehistoric Megan's Law. Hey, so I'm kinda new around here, and so legally I'm obligated.
He's a pervert.
Well, what he means to say is
Kitty diddler.
What? Okay, first of all, nobody got diddled, let alone...
Once a rapist, always a rapist.
Anyway, what was this episode about? Right. Bombardier beetle. So, yeah, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, let me tell you a story. This is about something that happened when I was around 11. One day I was just walking through the woods with my dog, not a care in the world, when I see this guy approaching from the other end. He was all by himself, and he had a football. And every now and then he would just toss the football up in the air, catch it, and then keep walking. When I walked past him, he muttered something along the lines of, "Hey kid, you want some football?" I assume he was propositioning me to a game of catch. Or maybe he just didn't like that football very much, I'm not quite sure. But between this guy's strange nature and the fact that he was 17 and I was around 11, I turned him down. I took the dog home, and later that day, me and my friend were back at the woods, just hitting shit with sticks, I guess. I don't know, whatever kids do. We were mostly chilling in the same place, and a little ways in, I see the guy walk past again. I think it's a bit strange, but as he turns the corner, I neglect to mention anything to my friend about my previous encounter. Around 2 minutes later, I hear some grown man shouting angrily, and my friend and I turn to look. Somehow, we were so engrossed in our nothing we were doing, that we somehow failed to notice the giant plumes of smoke rising up from where that guy turned the corner. I'm talking huge, like if a member of the Vape Nation happened to see these clouds, he'd probably go into diabetic shock. The shouts were coming from our neighbor, whose house bordered on the woods, and he must have spotted the smoke before we did. So he's shouting things along the lines of,
"What the fuck do you think you're doing? I'm gonna call the fucking cops on you. What is this?"
That's when the guy goes fucking ballistic.
No, please! I don't want to go to jail! It was an accident!
And a few high-pitched screeches which I don't think I'm able to replicate. My friend and I walk over to get a closer look. We see the guy standing on the edge of this huge ground fire. I'm talking at least 10 meters in diameter. Pitch black grass, smoke rising up, flames still around the edges. Now this guy must have been like a Boy Scout or something, because, like I said, it was about a minute and a half between him turning the corner and hearing the guy shouting. Maybe the football was just a propane tank he painted brown? Could have been a pyromancer for all I know. It was about that time that my friend and I realized that, as two young hip delinquents, it was not in our best interest to be standing in the near vicinity of a forest fire. So we skedaddled. As we heard sirens approach in the distance, I couldn't help but wonder what this guy's motive was. A few days later, I found out the guy lived somewhat nearby, and that he had mild autism. Yeah. That cleared a good bit up for me, because I have a couple friends on the spectrum, and they're good people, but sometimes they just do things. Nowhere near full-blown arson, mind you, more just along the lines of screaming fuck at the teacher and then walking out in the middle of class. But you get the idea. So the moral of the story here, kids, is that if somebody wants to play catch with you, you let them, or else they might unleash the fucking inferno. Hey, little Jimmy.
Yeah, what's up?
Do you like Pirates of the Caribbean?
Yeah, it's alright.
So do you think it'd be fun to be a pirate?
Yeah?
Well, guess what? You couldn't be more wrong.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, I know. At some point, every kid has dreamed about being a swashbuckling, corn-shuckling, wife-cuckling, cocksuckling pirate, but trust me when I say, it was really not all it's cracked up to be. First, we'll talk about the food. So one staple of the pirate diet was salted meat, usually wild oxen or pork. And I love jerky as much as the next guy, but this wasn't like a bag of Jack Links. In fact, it was probably closer in texture to your shoes than any meat you've ever eaten. In those days, you couldn't just snap into a Slim Jim. That's a modern luxury that we take for granted. Back then, the slogan was, gnaw on a Slim Jim for minutes on end, grinding it between your molars while the gallons of salt turn your mouth into a desert until the mangled hunk of flesh in your mouth is just soft enough to be shoved down your greasy fucking pirate throat without tearing a hole. Another essential food item was known as hardtack. This was essentially just flour and water baked into a cracker-like brick. Beyond the fact that it was totally flavorless, hardtack was also extremely dense, to the point where pirates would often have to slam their fists down on it in order to break it into pieces small enough to fit in their mouth. As long as it was kept dry, hardtack almost never spoiled, although it often became infested with weevils. Excuse me, sir? I'm a vegan, so can I have a new piece? One without any of Mother Nature's beautiful creatures in it? Thanks. Wait a minute, is this gluten-free? This better be hemp rope. Nah, but the weevils didn't make you sick or change the taste all that much, so, and this is true, the crew would just eat it in the dark, so that way they couldn't tell if they were eating a normal chunk or a weevily one. Then there's the crowding. So pirate ships typically packed in as many crew members as possible, because more pirates means more manpower when you go to board an enemy ship. Of course, the downside to that is that you're basically like a bunch of hairy, unwashed sardines. Let me illustrate what a typical night below deck was like. So you're sprawled out on the damp, musty wood floor. Everything's pitch black, you can't see a thing. The smell of the filth and the mold forces you to only breathe through your mouth. Suddenly, your left hand feels wet. Probably just seawater leaking through the hull. You sniff your hand, nope. No, that's piss. You feel something furry rub up against your elbow. It was either the body of a diseased rat or the beard of your diseased crewmate. Either way, that's probably where the piss came from. Some guy's moaning loudly in the next room. Hopefully he's just jerking off, because if he's dying, that's one more body to deal with in the morning. Rinse and repeat for 8 hours, and then it's daytime. The poor diet and cramped conditions led to disease being a huge problem aboard pirate ships. The most well-known of these diseases is scurvy, where you don't get enough vitamin C. When scurvy first begins, you just kind of feel tired all the time, no big deal. Then you get weird spots on your skin and your gums start bleeding. This progresses until all your teeth fall out and all of your body's mucous membranes start gushing blood and pus, causing you to die. So that's a lot of fun. There were tons of other diseases too, I won't go through them all, but here's a few honorable mentions. Also, some people say that alcoholism is a disease. I might just be disturbed, but that's one sickness I could definitely get down with. If it is a disease, then yeah, just about every pirate had this one. If anything though, I'd call that one of the few upsides of pirate life. Finally, there's the combat. So you've gone through all these disgusting, horrible living conditions, but at least you can enjoy the thrill of battle, right? Swinging from rope to rope, sword in your mouth, long, intense saber duels, that kind of thing. But that's typically not how it went down. For one thing, when pirates boarded a ship, 9 times out of 10, they'd just surrender immediately. Because what are a bunch of well-groomed merchants going to do against a horde of disgusting barbarians? If the defending ship did decide to fight back though, the resulting brawl wouldn't be anything like the movies. It'd be way worse, like immediate R rating. Because pirates rely a lot on brutality, both because they don't have much real training, and because it scares the shit out of people. If you were a deckhand on an invaded ship and you were stupid enough to fight back, you wouldn't be dancing around doing flips and shit, none of that. Instead, they'd probably shoot you in the stomach with a flintlock pistol, kick you to the ground, chop off your shoulder blade with a hand axe, gouge out your eyes with a marlin spike, wind your intestines around the prow, and then toss your twitching body overboard. And that's only a slight exaggeration. Honestly, if Jack Sparrow got attacked by actual pirates, he wouldn't last a second. It's kinda like a used car salesman going to prison, like, I'll be fine. If anybody tries intimidating me, I can get out of it with my quick wit and charming personality. Boy, you look real pretty from behind. Oh wow, I'm boned. So yeah, in short, if you're thinking about pulling a Captain Phillips anytime soon, I'd advise against it. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, whenever I browse this site, I see more and more videos of people talking about things like YouTuber drama, the election, world politics, and it made me think, hey, maybe I should start covering more relevant, nuanced topics in my videos. Anyway, let's talk about chickens. So the story of the chicken begins a long time ago in Southeast Asia. Now, this area had a ton of bamboo growing all over the place. And the thing about bamboo is it follows a very specific life cycle, where once every 50 years or so, every bamboo plant in a given region will blossom at the exact same time. Then, shortly after, they litter the whole area with these little seeds known as bamboo rice, or as I call them, bambinos. These pellets get planted, the current bamboo dies out, and the cycle starts over. Now, enter the ancestor of the domesticated chicken, known as the red jungle fowl. The jungle fowl lived in the same area as the bamboo, and, as you can imagine, they got a lot of benefit out of being literally knee-deep in food once every half-century. So much so that evolution basically said, alright, when food supplies go up, I want you to just start pumping out babies like there's no tomorrow. That way, we can take as much advantage of each bloom as possible. As a result, the chicken population became synchronized with the bamboo, shooting up during blooms and dwindling in between. Then humans showed up and they saw this pattern, and they said, wow, how bamboozling. And then they realized, wait a minute, that pun was dumb. But also, we can harness this whole chicken cycle thing. All we have to do is give these guys a whole bunch of food, and we can make their reproductive systems go into overdrive whenever we want. Do you know what that means? Lots of hot bird porn. No, it means we get as many eggs as we could ever dream of. So, with a bit of work, we managed to domesticate the chicken around 5000 BC. And as you can imagine, the idea of having a literal egg-laying machine around the house was extremely popular, leading to the chicken spreading across the entirety of the civilized world over the course of a few millennia. I think it's interesting that, despite the fact that the West has had chickens for most of its history, it wasn't until way later that we figured out where they came from. Like, alright men, it's time to delve into the world of the unknown. We're gonna see things the likes of which man has never laid eyes upon before. But, if you keep your wits about you, we just might make it out of here alive. Hey, is this yours? No? Weird. What the hell? Of course, having a constantly supercharged uterus is not without its drawbacks. After all, the chicken essentially goes through its entire menstrual cycle every day. So next time your girlfriend's complaining about how bad her period is, get her a box of chocolates and be generally attentive to her needs. You prick. Anyway, one thing with chickens and most other egg-laying critters is that they only have one hole in their pelvic region, which is called a cloaca, I think. Or cloaca. Cloaca? So the Croatia basically acts like a funnel, taking all the eggs and waste and sending it down the same chute. And while this might sound convenient at first, there is one fatal disadvantage that affects chickens in particular. Sometimes the egg can get stuck on its way out, leading to a condition known as egg binding. And since this means nothing can exit the clamato anymore, the egg-bound chicken ends up dying of constipation over the course of a couple days. Hey Jerry, how you doing? Not good, Sean. Not good. Oh man, what's wrong? It's just, ever since Jenny got egg-bound, things have been so stressful. Her funeral expenses are through the roof, and her memory means so much to me, but if the bills keep coming in like this, I'm not sure my family will be able to handle it. Well, hey man, you know what they say, don't put all your eggs in one casket. Let's just hope she doesn't get egg-zoomed. I'm sorry. Don't ever contact me or my kids ever again. I understand. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, you know what's cool? Entomology.
Etymology. There we go. Today we're going to talk about some words, some combinations thereof, and where they come from. First is the phrase white elephant. Now, for those out of the loop, a white elephant is a possession which its owner cannot dispose of and whose cost, particularly that of maintenance, is out of proportion to its usefulness. And also a game played during the holidays for people who prefer random garbage over actual personalized presents. According to legend, this saying dates back to the monarchs of Siam. Whenever one of the king's courtiers drew his displeasure through whatever means, he would offer them a gift of a white elephant. It was considered the ultimate insult to refuse a gift from the king, so naturally the elephantee would be forced to accept. Now, if you know elephants as well as I do, you would know that they are frickin' gigantic. They can consume around 50 gallons of water and 500 pounds of foliage every day, which would be quite expensive to keep up in modern times, let alone hundreds of years ago. Plus, these ones are albino, so you have to hose them down with SPF 30 once an hour or else they'll turn into one big tumor. Okay, not really, but they definitely needed their shade. Also, Southeast Asian cultures considered white elephants sacred, so you weren't allowed to make the animal work, and you'd have to hire a load of people to care for it on a daily basis. Basically, the person getting the gift would have to choose between financial ruin or letting it die and being socially ostracized and possibly even killed. I thought this whole thing was pretty clever, so I've started doing my own version. Whenever someone gets on my nerves, I spray paint progressive comments all over their house. That way, they'll have to spend the whole day angrily scrubbing it off, and then the neighbors will be like, "Wait, does that mean he likes the N-word? Bigoted scum." Next is balls to the wall. This one harkens back to the days when planes flew in the air. The throttle of many aircrafts would be controlled with either a lever or a plunger, either of which were often topped with a sphere for easy handling. Thus, when you wanted to throw the plane into max thrust, you'd put the balls to the wall. In a similar vein, the phrase balls deep comes from pinball machines. When you want to launch the ball full force, you pull the plunger all the way back, otherwise known as going balls deep. Nah, just kidding. That one actually means what you think it does. Next is getting your goat, a phrase used when someone or something annoys you. The origin of this phrase is still disputed by etymologists, but one theory traces back to the sport of horse racing. In order to stop horses from getting nervous before a race, their owners would stick a goat in the stables to keep them calm. Apparently, the presence of a goat has some kind of therapeutic effect on horses, kind of like a therapy dog, except they can't pet it on account of hooves, so they just sniff it for a while, I guess. Cut to a pack of young hooligans looking for something to do besides bootlegging and getting polio. They decide to break into the stables at night and escort the goat to an undisclosed location. Then when the race starts, instead of running straight ahead like a normal person, the horse would run into the crowd and dropkick a grandma or whatever, and the old crotchety oil tycoon who owns the horse would stand up, shaking his cane, yelling, "Those punks really get my goat." Thanks to modern medicine, anxious horses today can instead be given horsey Xanax to calm them down, which unfortunately means that the days of hot-blooded goat getting are over. However, some would argue that stealing horse tranquilizers can be equally rewarding in its own way. But enough of that mumbo jumbo. Hey, speaking of which, you ever wonder where mumbo jumbo comes from? Nice segue, Sam. Thanks, Sam. Anyway, strap in, kids. This one's gonna be good. Mumbo jumbo originates from the Mandingo people of West Africa. The Mandingos were a polygamous culture, and whenever a domestic quarrel broke out, they would soon hear animalistic screaming coming from the woods. They look over, and out runs this guy, known as Mumbo Jumbo. Now, Mumbo Jumbo's arrival was considered a big deal to the Mandingo. The whole tribe would sing and dance in the town center until midnight, at which point Mr. Jumbo would settle the dispute. And by settle the dispute, I mean tie the female to a post and slap her upside the head with a stick for an hour, while the rest of the village watched, all hootin' and a-hollerin'. And then he'd run screaming back into the woods, where he would remain until the next complaint arose. What the Mandingo women didn't know is that Mumbo Jumbo is not, in fact, a wild patriarchal deity from the forest, but merely the offending woman's husband or one of his friends wearing a costume made from tree bark and leaves. Anyway, the guy would be babbling nonsense the whole time, which is where the phrase Mumbo Jumbo is derived from. So next time one of your superiors uses the words Mumbo Jumbo in a jocular fashion, remember to report them to HR for promoting African wife beating. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, it's Tips Tuesday. So today I'm giving you a beginner's guide on how to unicycle. Alright, let's do this. Tips Tuesday. Step number 1, buying a unicycle. This part's pretty easy. I got mine on Amazon. You are gonna wanna pick the proper size, however, based on your height. I'm lanky as a fucking Kong, so I got a 24-inch. If you on the shorter side, go for the 20-inch. If you under 13, well, you probably shouldn't be on my channel. But if you are, go for the 16-inch. They're generally only around $60 or $70, mostly because they're basically just a wheel and a seat, so that's a plus. Step number 2, assembly. Okay, you can probably do this part on your own. They give you directions in the box, so I'm not going to waste your time with this. However, you do want to make sure your pedals are on the correct way. If you put them on backwards, it could make it so they unscrew while you're riding. Trust me, I learned the hard way. Step number 3, mounting. Kids, a unicycle is like a woman. It's not hard to get to know a good unicycle, especially if you've got lots of money. But if you want to mount it, that's still going to require some skill on your part. In my experience, however, I found that those things that are hardest to mount are oftentimes the most rewarding. You see this tricycle? This tricycle's a whore. It has a poor relationship with its father, and it does not deserve your respect. Unicycles, that's where the real men play. Here's how you do it. First off, find something to hold on to. Trust me, you're gonna need it. Could be a car, or a trash bin, or Jay Leno's chin. Me, I used my basement's low ceiling. If you can reach yours, I highly recommend it. Next, rotate the wheel so that one pedal is at the bottommost point. That's where your first foot's gonna go. Once you got all your weight on that foot, put the other one into place. As you do so, you will find yourself being placed upon the seat. Now guys, remember how I said a unicycle is like a woman? Well, forget that for a moment, because you want your junk to have as little involvement with the unicycle as possible. Remember in middle school you learned about levers? Well, you're gonna want to use your taint as a fulcrum on the seat in order to maintain your balance. Too far back, you're gonna fall over. Too far forward, you're just gonna castrate yourself. So be careful. Step number 4, riding. Okay, remember my woman metaphor? That's back on. When you're riding a unicycle, you require great balance, as well as a steady rhythm. Also, you're probably not gonna last too long your first few times, just FYI. If you prefer, you can deflate your tires a little when you're first learning. Cause a flabby unicycle might not let you go as fast, but they're certainly easier to ride. Anyway though, riding a uni is a lot like riding a bike. Except instead of just balancing on your left-right axis, you gotta worry about your front-back axis as well. So you on a bike, you wanna turn right, you lean right, right? Same with every direction on a unicycle. If you wanna go forward, in addition to pedaling, you gotta lean forward. For your first few goes, you're probably gonna want to hold on to something. This ain't called a crash course for nothing. Fortunately with the uni, it's very easy to dismount whenever things go wrong. Out of hundreds of failures, I personally only ever landed face first around 2 or 3 times. Above all, keep practicing. Eventually, kids, you'll be like that stupid ass frog meme that everybody hates. And remember, riding a uni is like riding half a bike. You only half forget. Sure.
Hey kids, as we all know, the evolution of species is an incredible process, driven by little more than the random chance that certain mutations may happen to provide a practical advantage in a creature's environment. And as a result, there's a lot of things out there that look super dumb once you strip back a few layers. Here's the top 10 worst animal skeletons of all time. So first and foremost, I'd like to settle a little debate I've been seeing floating around the past few weeks. Yes, penguins do, in fact, have knees, but in order to hide full-grown legs into one plump cylinder, you gotta have a little skeletal trickery on your side. You guys ever do wall sits in gym class or elsewhere? One of the most torturous exercises out there. I now feel even worse for penguins, because not only did they have to deal with living in a frigid black and white hellscape, the most hostile environment known to man second only to the vacuum of space, all the while constantly pursued by ravenous bloodthirsty sea dogs, but they're also secretly doing wall sits their entire life. Quick side note, in Mandarin, the word for penguin consists of the characters for business goose, which is fucking hilarious. Like one day a goose put on a suit and said, "Today it is time to make a name for myself, honk." This next guy is known as Parsons chameleon, found in the more remote regions of Madagascar. Notice the fleshy protuberances around its nose area. Turns out, not fleshy, not even remotely fleshy, not even one flesh. Instead, it just has a skull forever frozen in time in the middle of exploding, like it sneezed right in the middle of God shaping it out of clay, and he was just like, whatever, it's a feature now. So for that, this rough-headed reptilian gets number 9. Normally I would have ranked it higher, but that's a dope tale, so he gets some pity points. Next is the pufferfish. So for most of my life, I've pictured pufferfish as just not having any bones. I know it doesn't really make sense, but neither does them turning into a balloon like a goddamn cartoon. Turns out, in their normal state, they actually look like this, and when they inflate, those concentric rings of spines slide outwards past one another to cover the full area, like the aperture aperture of a camera lens expanding to cover the full frame of the fish. The sheer ingenuity of this design has shattered my childhood dream of real-life balloon animals, which has earned the pufferfish the number 8 spot on this list. Now, if you've gotten around to certain zoological circles, you've been shown this skull and been told, ah yes, that comes from the dwarf elephant. Oh, you've never seen one? That's because they're extinct. And that thing in the middle? Ah yes, nothing more than the nose hole to which the trunk connects. However, if you're a rational, free-thinking adult like me, you can look past the lies spoon-fed to you by Nat Geo and other liberal media outlets and see this for what it is. A cyclops. Next is the orca, otherwise known as the killer whale, the panda torpedo, or the SeaWorld slave. Its skeleton is fairly normal at first glance, but check out this little thing under here. That little bony blip is actually all that remains of the legs and pelvis of the orca from when it evolved from land mammals. Personally, I think that's highly disrespectful to their ancestors. Like, they could have taken the seal route and used those legs for good in the water, but instead these sea cowards said, no thanks, we're gonna undo all that evolution and just be bigger, smarter, warmer fish again. But hey, we'll keep this little piece of nothing just to remember you guys by. Truthfully, I could have chosen almost any cetacean to pick on for this, but the orca's face also reminds me of SCP-682, which is the most OP overrated shit out there, so he gets the number 6 spot. Moving on, now bear with me here. In every other mammal on Earth, the canine teeth point downward from the gum to the mouth. You know, like a tooth. But this guy, known as the Babirusa, said huh, and decided to have them grow up through the entirety of its fucking snoot and out the other end, which is the most nonsensical thing I've ever seen. Like, toenails out the front? How cliche. Let's make them go through the whole foot instead. Look, now I can kick good behind me. That's not all though. These tusks also keep growing for the creature's entire life, which isn't a problem in and of itself, right? Rodents, they keep chewing stuff to wear them down. Alligators, they just let them fall out now and then. But the Babirusa's like, pfft, I'll just nut in a lady pig long before this becomes an issue. So if it lives long enough, the teeth can curve right on around and slowly bore into the thing's face, like built-in Chinese bamboo torture. And occasionally, they can end up actually piercing the skull and shish kebabbing the brain. Now some people might say that this doesn't belong on this list, given that teeth aren't technically bones. And to those people, kids, we say, eat shit and die. Next we have the octopus. The octopus skeleton is so bad that it doesn't even exist. Sure, they got this little thing in the middle, but that doesn't count, that's just chitin. And yeah, they can get in a jar or whatever, but at what cost? At the animal picnics, the crowd shouts, bleh, shun the spineless freak. And at the animal wheelbarrow races, with nothing to grab hold of, the cephalopod holds a solitary vigil at the starting line. And lo, the octopus wins naught but a participant medal at the Grand Prix, and the number 4 spot on this list. Moving on, here's the skeleton of a fruit bat. Now, not a big deal to us regular folk, but imagine if humans had no context of bats and they dug this thing up. Like, class, archaeologists have recently found these fossilized remains, and using modern technology, we can see exactly what it would have looked like back when it was alive. This abominable creature is known only to scientists as Finger Boy, and is theorized to have fed upon fruit, insects, and the dreams of orphans, which it would siphon out from the ears of the errant little waifs whilst they slumbered. By the way, if you Google image bat skeleton, like, more than half of them have the ears built in, just like, I feel the extraordinarily bat-like wings and figure of our decoration are much too subtle for our consumers. Better slap these on. At number 2, we have the anteater. From its oboe-like skull to its gorilla fist and hands, one can only wonder who let this creature exist. Fun fact, if you take the anteater's skull and blow into its nose, it plays a beautiful song recounting the animal's entire life, and then security escorts you out of the museum. Looking at this, I can only pose the question asked for generations long before my own. That being, why the long face? Before we get to the number 1 spot, here's a few honorable mentions. The wolf eel. The ostrich. This human-cat hybrid I found on a tabloid site. And of course, the mermaid. So at our number 1 spot, we have this creature. That's supposed to be a mirror. I know most of you can't see yourself in it on account of your filthy Dorito smeared screen, so just take my word for it. So what's wrong with humans, you ask? Well, a lot of things, but for now let's stick to the skeleton. First off, these bones right here, these are known as the metatarsals. All part of the foot, right? No, that's a bunch of primate propaganda. In most other groups of land mammals, what we'd consider our ankles is actually the quote-unquote knee of the animal. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Also, it's estimated that around 80% of people will experience chronic back pain at some point in their life. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Lastly, probably something you've heard about at some point, our skull to pelvis ratio. For most animals, giving birth, not a big deal. Small heads, wide hips, mazel tov. But check out the big brain on Brett. Throws a real monkey wrench in the works there. For a while it led to some problems till those extra brains figured out how to work around it, so I guess you win this round, humans. But that doesn't stop you from also winning the #1 spot on the worst skeletons of all time. But hey, just cause you'll forever be flawed on the inside, doesn't mean you can't improve yourself on the outside. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I'm still scared of swine flu. Hey kid. Yeah, you. I just got off the phone with the big man upstairs, and he told me that I need to clear a few things up around here. So without further ado, here's 10 pieces of malarkey that you might still be spreading. Number 1. Nobody was ever burned to death at the Salem witch trials. Of the accused, 15 died in prison, 19 were hanged, and 1 was squished to death. That last one is way more interesting than any cremation, by the way. Dude was a badass. His name was Giles Corey. He was 81 years old and so done with the town of Salem's garbage that he wouldn't even dignify the trial with a plea. So the town stuck in between 2 boards and stacked rocks on top of him in an effort to draw out a confession. But every time they tried to get something out of him, all he would say was, "More weight." This went on for 3 solid days until he finally died, never giving any indication as to whether or not he was a witch. One can only wonder. Number 2, the OG Buddha wasn't the obese guy. That's Budai, a Chinese folk character meant to represent Maitreya, aka future Buddha. Now this shirt is double sad. Number 3, Buddha wasn't a god either. He was just a guy named Gautama. Now this shirt is triple sad. Number 4, ever heard of a vomitorium? Turns out no, it's not a place where Roman nobles would go to make room for more pheasant spleen and lobster eyelids. It's just a big entranceway to the Colosseums that hordes of peasants would spew out of. Number 5, Washington never cut down a cherry tree in his youth. I don't get this one at all. Apparently it's supposed to paint the man in a good light somehow. It's like, Tyler, what the hell happened while we were gone? Where's the tree in the front yard? Oh yeah, that was me. Got bored. Just felt like vandalizing something, you know? Hey, what about my honest character? Number 6, the pyramids weren't actually built by slaves. These workers were respected members of society. They ate meat and worked in 3-month shifts, and even got to be buried right next to the tomb after their death. Matter of fact, that's more than we can say for the people working on man's greatest achievements today. If I spent years of my life helping to build the space station, you're damn right I'd want the Salmonella Memorial Corpse Receptacle floating along right next to it. That would be amazing. Number 7, the Great Wall of China is not the only man-made object visible from space. I don't know where you dipshits got this one from. First of all, there's no way you could see it with the unaided eye. The wall is like 30 meters thick at most, while the distance to outer space is generally recognized to be 100 kilometers up, known as the Kármán line. To give some perspective, that's like me holding up a standard-sized guitar pick from across the entire length of a football field and asking you what color it is. Also, there are plenty of man-made objects that are way bigger in terms of local surface area than the Great Wall, so even if it was visible, there's no way it would be the only one. Number 8, you might have heard this one before. You know, Hitler was a jerk and all, but hey, he made the Autobahn, so at least he was efficient. Actually, Hitler didn't create the Autobahn. It was already there. He just helped expand it into newer territory. In a similar vein, Mussolini didn't make the trains run on time, with most of Italy's infrastructure repairs happening before his rise to power in 1922, and even then they weren't nearly as punctual as he'd like you to believe. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to find something else to like about these fascists. Like Hitler's elegant way of speaking. Or the way Mussolini says spaghetti. Paschetti! Number 9, Iron Maidens weren't actual torture devices used in medieval times. Basically what happened is, some archaeologists in the 1800s saw an old metal coffin and some spikes, and said, yo, wouldn't it be wildin' if we put these things up in here, so that way if someone goes in it, they get poked in their bits? You are a sick man, Cornelius. I like it. Into the museum it goes. At least Iron Maiden was real. They were as real as it gets. Still are. And don't you forget it. Number 10, Einstein never failed math. He had mastered both integral and differential calculus by the age of 15. 99% chance this one was just made up to make glue eaters feel better about themselves. Well, congratulations, Dimitri. Looks like you failed pre-algebra for the 3rd time. Brady still can't graduate. Well, hey, that means I'm still on par with famous smart science man, so yeah, worship me. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, remember Neanderthals? Me neither, cause they're dead. Some say they went extinct because of out-competition by Homo sapiens, but personally, I don't subscribe to that notion. I believe that they went extinct primarily because they interbred with early humans, not because they were inferior survivors. Now, I could ramble on for a couple of hours about the genetic and archaeological evidence for this, but modern experts have already run those points into the ground. Now, instead, I want to bring something totally new to the table that I thought of myself. I call it the sexy Neanderthal theory. Okay, hear me out. From a modern day point of view, this all sounds ridiculous, right? If someone came up to you asking if you wanted to reproduce with a Neanderthal, you'd say no, that's disgusting. Who are you? This is a mall. Where is security? But that's just what society has taught you to believe. It doesn't really reflect the true animal within you. Don't believe me? Take a look at this sculpture. Gross, right? Well, guess what? Cavemen used to whack off to that. They thought it was great. So we're gonna have to put away all of our deeply rooted cultural ideations for a second, and instead look at things from a purely biological perspective. First, I gotta learn y'all a thing or two about sexual selection. There are two main types of sexual selection. There's intrasexual selection, where members of the same sex compete for dominance, and intersexual selection, where members of one sex are intentionally choosy about who they mate with. Now, most of these are done by most animals to some degree, but with humans and most other mammals, there's a bit of an asymmetry in how either sex performs its selection. Namely, males tend to focus more on intrasexual selection, while females prioritize intersexual selection. This isn't just me stereotyping, I swear. There's actually an evolutionary reason for this. See, whereas males barely invest anything at all into mating in the absence of monogamous culture, childbearing is a huge deal to females, using up a lot of resources, so it only makes sense that males would want to be more promiscuous and females more selective. So to recap, The Bachelorette, that's an accurate portrayal of our most basic instincts. On the other hand, if The Bachelor were to be done with a bunch of cavemen, there wouldn't be this season-long show. Just a 5-hour special where The Bachelor bangs every contestant at once, which, in all fairness, would still be higher quality entertainment than the show we have now. Anyway, what's all this got to do with Neanderthals, you ask? Well, it just so happens the male Neanderthal's morphology makes it so that they would be able to outman the male Homo sapiens, both intrasexually and intersexually. For one, their thick bones and heavy joints suggest that they had way more muscle mass than humans of the day, putting them at a huge advantage both in asserting dominance and in appearing attractive. Secondly, their facial features exaggerate all the characteristics that makes a face appear male in humans, with square, well-defined jaws and heavy brow lines, further increasing their appeal to human females. Broad shoulders, that's hot. Also, their large chest cavities and broad nasal passages would make it so that their vocalizations would be much louder than humans, adding still to their intimidation factor. So basically, when the male Neanderthals strut into a human village, they'd be guaranteed Casanovae, ensuring that they would interbreed. But what about the Neanderthal females, you ask? If the men are more manly by default, surely the women would conversely be more man-ish. One would think that this homeliness would counteract the reproductive success of their male counterparts, but this is where that whole sexual asymmetry thing comes in. Cause whereas the human females would be selective towards the Neanderthals, the males don't really care. They're gonna take what they can get. Their women already waltzed off with those jabronis, they're lonely, what's a guy gotta lose? So in the end, when a population of humans meets a population of Neanderthals, there'd actually be an increased chance of genetic admixture, thereby making extinction through interbreeding seem like a much more plausible outcome for the Neanderthals. If the Nobel Committee is watching, I'd like my prize sent to this address. Thank you.
Hey kids, when most people think of the Middle Ages, they think of them as being like humanity's dumb teenage years, where all we did was play harpsichord in our room and burn heretics with our friends. But that's not entirely true. In fact, I would argue that the medieval era saw just as much genius as any other period in time. It's just most of that genius went towards finding new and creative ways to brutally slaughter those you disagree with. Here's a few highlights. First, we'll talk about the werewolf. So, as you can imagine, medieval castles were not easy to break into. They were basically like those jungle gym things at Chuck E. Cheese's. Massive in size, intentionally confusing layout, security everywhere, and by the end of your visit, you'd probably end up with some kind of disease. So in order to help penetrate fortresses, medieval armies would often utilize siege weapons, one of the most popular of which was the trebuchet. Now this device is interesting enough on its own, but it gets better. So around 1300 AD, King Edward I of England was in the process of invading Scotland. However, one fortress known as Stirling Castle was giving him a lot of trouble. He laid siege to the building for many months months without any real progress. Then one day he woke up and had a revelation. Hey guys, listen, why are we wasting our time building all these regular-sized trebuchets when we could just build one giant one and call it a day? So that's what he did. This gargantuan war machine was known as the Warwolf and stood at around 6 stories tall. To give a bit of perspective, this is about as tall as King Kong was in his largest film depiction. So basically, picture a giant fucking ape launching boulders like they're baseballs, and you've got a pretty good idea of what the Warwolf was capable of. It was so intimidating that when the Scots saw the English constructing the beast outside the castle, they immediately surrendered out of fear. But then Edward was like, ha, fuck that, I'm gonna test this bad boy out, and proceeded to take pot shots on the castle anyway. Another devious product of the Middle Ages was a flammable substance known as Greek fire. Contrary to popular belief, Greek fire was not invented by the ancient Greeks. Rick Riordan, you lying prick. It was actually invented in the 7th century AD by the Byzantines, who happened to inhabit Greece at the time. Historians still don't know exactly what it was made of, but they do know that it acted a lot like napalm, sticking to ships, sticking to people, even floating and continuing to burn on the surface of the water. The Byzantines also had these siphon-like tubes that they'd put on the front of their boats to pour Greek fire on the enemy, kinda like makeshift flamethrowers. These were retired pretty quickly though, mostly because when you put the words makeshift and flamethrower next to each other, you're bound to run into some problems eventually. Our next bright idea comes from a woman known as Olga of Kiev. So Olga was a princess who ruled the area around the capital of modern-day Ukraine from 945 to 963 AD. And she had quite a track record for being just a total badass. For example, the Drevlians, a tribe of people under Kiev's control, once sent 20 men to Kiev in order to convince Olga to marry their prince, under the pretense that if they did marry, the prince could claim her rule over Kiev. In response, she had all 20 of them buried alive. She then sent a letter to the prince saying she accepted his proposal, but she would need a bunch of his most distinguished governors to escort her on the journey. Once the men showed up, Olga was like, hey guys, long journey, huh? How'd you like to take a bath in this here bathhouse? They were like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. Okay, have fun, you guys. Man, it's like a sauna in here. It is a sauna, dipshit. You have a point. So long story short, this lady just did not give a heck. My favorite story about her starts with her besieging a Drevlian city that refused to pay tribute to her. The people in the city were already well aware of the type of rampaging that Olga was capable of, so they were already scared shitless. But when she showed up, she was like, alright, you know what guys, I'm gonna play nice. Just bring me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household and I'll be on my way. Okay. What are they for exactly? We're just hungry. I mean, we got some food too. We could just give... I'm sorry, did I fucking stutter? Alright, birds it is. Then, once the creatures were in Olga's hands, she had each of her soldiers tie a cloth-bound piece of sulfur to one of the birds' feet, which was then set alight. The birds were then released all at once, and when they flew back into the city, their nests acted like little piles of tinder, resulting in nearly every house in the entire city erupting in flames simultaneously. And while the whole place burned to the ground, Olga just sat and watched. By the way, it's worth mentioning that, after her death, Olga was canonized as a Catholic saint, presumably around the same time as Saint Tiffany, who went around pushing in the soft spots of babies, and Saint Jerry the Goat Fucker, who, as the name implies, fucked a lot of goats. In conclusion, pay your taxes. To my loyal subscribers, I'll see you in 3 months. I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, time to alienate 23.9% of the United States from my potential audience, cause today, we're talking popes. Now don't get me wrong, the modern papacy is a great thing. Just a genuinely virtuous man being elected to govern and set an example for Christians everywhere, that's awesome. But back in the day, not so. See, in the Middle Ages, the church was one of the greatest powers in the Western world, having massive influence over monarchs and laymen alike. And as we know, with great power, comes great tomfoolery. Here's some of the less wholesome popes that history has to offer. Pope Stephen VI assumed the pontificate in May of 896, during a time of great instability for the papacy, where rulers and families of all different shapes and sizes were vying for influence over the Catholic Church. As such, successive popes from this period often had different ideas about how things should be run. Stephen, for example, didn't much care for Pope Formosus, the guy before last. Why? It's complicated. Even if I could wrap my head around all this, it'd probably be boring as hell, so just take it on good faith that Steve had a lot of beef with Formosus. So much beef, or as we call it papal bull, that Stephen couldn't even be happy that the dude was already dead. So he had the 8-month-old corpse of Formosus dug up, dressed up in pope clothes, sat down on a throne, and literally put on trial, with a deacon appointed to give all his responses for him. So you thought you could get away from the law with that little dying stunt of yours? Well, tell me me, Mr. Thrombosis, did you violate canon law, commit perjury, and pretend to be a bishop when you weren't? Yes, pasta fazool, I am a fool. I've heard all I need to hear. This court finds you guilty, and everything you did as Pope, we legally declare to be fake and dumb and stupid and dumb. Now throw him in the river. What? The river? Can he do that? See the hat? That means I'm Pope. P-O-O-P Pope. You better 3-point that bitch into the briny deep right quick, or I'm gonna raise hell. Metaphorically. So they throw him in the river. This whole thing caused an uproar among Formosa's supporters, and after Formosas's corpse was allegedly seen performing miracles at the riverbank, Stephen ended up being overthrown, imprisoned, and executed by strangulation. The body, now slimy and disgusting, was fished out of the Tiber and reinterred in St. Peter's Basilica, where it rests to this day. Next, we'll talk about John the 12th. This guy already looks like one of my characters. Why don't we just, yeah, there we go. This guy ascended to the throne when he was just 18 years old, which is insane. If I was elected world's biggest hat wearer at that age, you better believe things would get real unpapal real quick. I'm talking gambling, hookers, setting fires, and toasting to the devil. And when you know it, these are all things John the 12th did. It's said that he took the sacred palace and literally made it into a whorehouse. Matter of fact, while researching the guy, I stumbled across this list of sexually active popes. This is a real Wikipedia article. Take a hike, toilet paper orientation, daddy's got a new favorite. John is featured prominently on this list, of course. He had a thing for widows for some reason. Personally, I'm not big on weepy old hags. I'm more of a carefree young hag type of guy, but to each their own. He also banged his niece a bunch, which not the most virtuous act, but you know, Middle Ages and bloodline, fucking whatever. His playboy lifestyle eventually caught up to him though, leading to the Synod of Rome, where everyone got together to talk about what a piece of shit he is so they could kick him off the throne. Besides all the deviancy, there was a lot of things they had problems with. For one, someone once offered John some money to ordain a 10-year-old as a bishop, and he was just like, alright, I would have done it for free, honestly. Look how big those robes are on him, that's hilarious. He also had a deacon ordained in a horse stable, just like, oh, for fuck's sake, alright, let's get this over with. Shouldn't we be doing this in like a church? Listen, bucko, if it's good enough for Jesus to be born in, it's good enough for you to have your little cardinal party. No, sir, not cardinal, he's just a deacon. Not if you keep running your mouth, you aren't. He also liked going on hunting trips now and then, generally considered to be something popes don't do, although my suspicion is that they were just tired of cleaning his big stupid camo hat every time. Probably his worst act, though, was putting on a helmet, followed closely in second by the time one of his subdeacons got on his nerves, so he literally cut off his dick and murdered him. So between all this and some conflicts with Otto I of the Holy Roman Empire, John was uncanonically ousted in 963. Except as soon as Otto left Rome, nobody was there to pressure him off physically anymore. So John was like, lol, just kidding, rounded up all his groupies, kicked the new pope off the throne, and continued his role like nothing happened by early 964. But just a few months later, fate caught up with John, and he died the way he lived. Committing adultery. Now let's be real, we all have our little guilty pleasures in life. Some people like a nice bag of Cheetos, others like scented candles or poorly drawn educational videos. Alexander VI liked watching horses fuck. According to Vatican chronicler Johann Burckhardt, he would specifically arrange for his stallions to be introduced to mares in heat outside his palace, and he'd stand up on his balcony to watch them violently mate, which just tickled him pink for some fucking reason, and he'd laugh uproariously during the entire spectacle. He also once threw a party in the palace called the Banquet of Chestnuts, also referred to as the Joust of Whores. Wait a minute, horse jousting, horses banging. Was dyslexia a thing back then? Nah, but during the banquet, Alexander had 50 of Rome's finest raggedy harlots line up and strip down for him and his guests, which, by the way, included 2 of his children, which, by the way, he had many children, but at this point hardly a concern. Guests began throwing chestnuts at the ladies, who got down on their hands and knees and scrambled frantically, like the cook at Denny's when I held him at gunpoint, trying to collect as many as they could. After this went on for a while, Alexander was like, alright kiddos, game time. Whoever can bang the most broads before the night's over wins Rome's finest silks, and the only condition is that anybody who makes a joke about nutting on someone's chest gets disqualified. It's too easy. This is all according to that one Johann guy, mind you. Some secondary sources differ pretty significantly on the more lurid details of all this, so do take it with a grain of salt, but at the same time, this guy was the official record taker for the ceremonies he was involved with, so it seems equally likely to me that the other guys just wanted to save a bit of face, but who knows. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey adults. So most of us are aware of at least one animal companion to the commander-in-chief. All but 3 presidents have owned some kind of pet during their term, and there's good
good reason for that. Not only does a lovable mutt serve to humanize an otherwise larger-than-life figure, but their cute antics can also be a great distraction when needed. Huh? Drone strikes. Never heard of her. Hey, we're doing a photo op with this dog that shares a name with my vice president's son, cause you know, that's not weird at all. But as it turns out, dogs and cats are just the tip of the iceberg. There have been a lot of quadrupedal occupants of the White House, even without Miss Lewinsky. So today we'll be going through just a few of the more interesting ones. Going back to the beginning, Washington had critters galore, including 4 black and tan slur hounds that he named Drunkard, Taster, Tippler, and Tipsy. They sound like if Santa's reindeer were all alcoholics, which would be a shame because Rudolph's red nose would no longer be of note. John Adams had 3 dogs that presumably spanned the alignment chart, being named Juno, Mark, and Satan respectively. Not a joke. Jefferson kept around 40 sheep during his presidency, one of which was a 4-horned Shetland ram. Though nameless, said ram soon became famous for killing a young boy on White House grounds. Rather than immediately destroying the animal as we'd expect today, Jefferson just had it moved back to Monticello. It was eventually put down, but only after it single-handedly killed several other rams at the estate, which just goes to show how Jefferson operated. Random child, not the best optics, but that can be forgiven. But my own property, that's a bridge too far, Rambo. John Quincy Adams' wife Louisa practiced sericulture, which is a fun word for silkworm keeping. As a side note, sericulture's been going on since at least 3630 BC, which is kinda nutty, because that means we domesticated worms to turn their goo into clothes before we figured out how to ride a horse. Jackson had an African gray parrot named Poll, short for Polly, that would apparently curse like a sailor, probably thanks to the teachings of Old Hickory himself. Having outlived its owner, Poll ended up being removed from Jackson's funeral service after unleashing so much profanity that guests found it genuinely upsetting. He also kept roosters for cockfighting, which was acceptable at the time and still far from the worst thing he's done morally. During Van Buren's term, the Sultan of Oman sent a variety of gifts to the president, among them being a pair of tiger cubs. He was like, "This is badass," and desperately wanted to keep them in the White House. But the dickheads in Congress asserted that, due to a specific constitutional provision, gifts to the presidential office weren't for the man himself, but for the people. Van Buren said, "Fuck the people, them's my tigers," and got into a legal battle with the legislator over the issue, which he eventually lost. The tigers were subsequently sent to a zoo, and over 20 years later, Van Buren died of pneumonia, completely unrelated to this incident. Although Andrew Johnson had no du jour pets, he did befriend a family of mice he found in his bedroom, feeding them flour and grain and referring to them as the little fellows. It's an oddly wholesome thing to hear from someone who essentially set the trajectory for the next 100 years of black disenfranchisement. Mr. Johnson, we still have a country to rebuild. Get out of my room, I'm getting rat-pilled. Taft had 2 cows during his term. The first of them was named Mooly Wooly, and she died a year and a half in after, quote, eating too many oats. Mooly was promptly replaced by the far more dignified Pauline Wayne. She was a real dime of a heifer, which led Taft to show her off at the International Dairymen's Expo in Milwaukee. In order to get her there, she was transported in a private car attached to a train headed for the stockyards in Chicago. But a switch crew mixed up which car was hers, leading to 2 days of frantic telegraphs asking where the president's cow had gone. She only narrowly avoided the slaughterhouse when a couple of attendants at the stockyard recognized Pauline for what she was, and all was well. This next one requires a little background info. So the traditional Thanksgiving dinner was and remains a significant yearly ceremony for the first family. For half a century, from 1873 to 1913, the duty of providing the presidential turkey belonged to one Horace Vose, a private turkey farmer based in Rhode Island. After his death, though, things turned into a free-for-all, with numerous farmers sending unsolicited turkeys, both alive and dead, in an attempt to secure a position as the next annual caterer for the White House. Nobody was decided on for a decade, and upon assuming office in 1923, Calvin Coolidge found the volume of birds showing up at his doorstep alarming, and put an end to the tradition that year, instead opting to buy his own turkey. But in 1925, after much outside pressure, he caved, and was immediately flooded with not only turkey, but a variety of increasingly exotic animals to eat. Among them was a live raccoon he received the following year. Coolidge was, at the time, blissfully unaware of the intricate dance performed on the palate between forward yet ephemeral gaminess and heady seductive musk when one submits himself to the experience of a toothsome raccoon fillet, and as such he decided to keep it as a pet instead. Dubbed Rebecca, the creature soon came to be a core member of the Coolidge family. She ate as well as any of them, being fed things like shrimp and persimmons, and she was particularly fond of eggs. Given free reign over the house, Rebecca's hobbies reportedly included unscrewing light bulbs, uprooting houseplants, and playing with wet bars of soap in the bathtub. She was so beloved that she even had her own treehouse built for her in the White House yard. When the Coolidges made way for the Hoovers, Rebecca was forced to vacate her post, but the new first family soon found that they had a squatter on their hands. The new tenant of Rebecca's treehouse was a wild opossum who,
who, rather than being evicted, was adopted by the Hoovers in a similar fashion to Rebecca, albeit from a farther distance, mostly just saying, yeah, that's ours now. He was given the name Billy Possum, which is a reference to our old friend Taft. See, as the man following Teddy Roosevelt in the White House, Taft had some big shoes to fill. So during his term, some enterprising young dumbasses approached Taft with what they claimed would be the sequel to the teddy bear. They called it Billy Possum, which is itself a reference to the president's fondness of possum and taters, a dish he famously requested at a banquet in Atlanta as an act of goodwill towards the South and its culture. Taft found the idea amusing enough that he gave the green light, and many thousands of Billy Possums were produced. Given their total obscurity today, it's clear these toys were a massive flop, and there's a few reasons for that. For one, trying to force fads at all is like trying to push water uphill, but also, the story of Roosevelt refusing to shoot a tied-up bear has a bit more symbolic poetry to it than, it's a possum cause he like possum, he a fat boy, eat him up good. Couple that with the constant character assassination that the opossum as an animal has received from ignorant urbanites, and it becomes obvious that this thing was doomed from the start. But anyway, that's where the Hoover opossum got his name, and his exploits were pretty limited outside of temporarily filling in as a mascot of a local high school. In 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gifted a dog to the Kennedys, named Pushinka, or Fluffy. And while it is normally rude to look a gift dog in the mouth, an exception can be made when the single biggest threat to the free world insists that said dog should live with the president. Pushinka was x-rayed, put through metal detectors, and given ultrasounds out of fear that someone implanted her with a listening device. Fortunately, though there may be bugs in some of you mugs, there ain't no bugs in she, and Pushinka remained a Kennedy for the rest of her days. While truthfully, the gift was likely given as a simple act of good faith designed to reduce Cold War tensions, Pushinka was also the daughter of Strelka, who, during Sputnik 5, became the first mammal to make it back from space alive. So I'd like to think of it as more of a passive-aggressive space race flex. Like, yeah, our astronanimals are so alive, they're making babies even. Hope looking at this one constantly reminds you of where you stand. With that, I hope you found this highlight reel enlightening. It feels good to know that while Congress has always been a zoo, so too has the White House at times. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and you make my girlhood tremble.
Hey kids, from clubbing seals to inventing new compound nouns for snow, nobody knows how to kick it quite like the Inuit. Of course, if you're a close-minded tree dweller like me, you might initially think that they can't be that good at storytelling, given that they only know about like 6 things. But that's not true. They've actually got an incredibly complex and fascinating oral tradition. You could ask one about it, there's plenty of these guys around today, but they've got Jesus and microwaves and shit, and that's boring. We want to talk about the stuff from before missionaries came and sent their miserable way of life to a farm upstate. So instead, let a 20-year-old college kid who's never lived outside of Delaware tell you all about it. Obvious disclaimer, Inuits are super diverse. Calling a caribou Inuit a copper Inuit is like calling a copper caribou a caribou caribou. Sure, they both look the same from far away, but when a thunderstorm hits, you better know which one to hide under. As such, while most of the following can be applied in broad terms to most Inuits, the little details come from a variety of subcultures that don't necessarily represent the whole. Got it? Swank. Now, a lot of the world's faiths are centered around bringing people together and inspiring them with stories and images of the divine, so as to give them a wider sense of purpose here on Earth. That's all well and good, but that whole search for greater meaning thing only really comes into play once your original purpose of making sure you don't die is pretty much figured out. Not so for the Inuit. You see, it ain't so easy living in a place where plants can't grow and being naked for an hour means certain death. As such, their beliefs were a little more practical, being more so geared towards fostering the paranoid levels of fear required to survive in such a hostile environment. For example, the Inuit believed that everyone has a sort of life force or soul, what they called anirnik, and like plenty of religions, they believed it lived on after death and could meddle in the world of mortals. But while most cultures regard animals as being spiritually inferior meat puppets, to the Inuits, a creature's soul is just as powerful and vengeful as that of a person. And like I said, up there in the Arctic, not much greenery in the scenery, so they basically had no choice but to devour nothing but souls every single day. And wouldn't you know it, souls don't much care for getting ate. So the Inuit made sure to follow a complex set of guidelines on how to placate their prey in the afterlife, lest the pissed off ghost of that Arctic tern whispers sweet nothings into a polar bear's ears and turns your whole village into a big Japanese flag by sunrise. Here's a few. If you kill something, make sure you eat it all. Just as an American who doesn't clean his plate doesn't get dessert, an Inuit who doesn't eat all his walrus doesn't get any more walrus. Ever. till they starve. If you kill a polar bear, make sure to point its head towards the direction it came from so it can find its way home more easily. If you pull a seal out of the water, give him some fresh water so he's not thirsty when you bash his brain in. Also, its spirit lives in its bladder, so make sure to hold on to it until the yearly bladder festival, where everyone gets together, blows up their bladders like balloons, and throws them out to sea so they can reincarnate into new seals. These taboos aren't all just about hunting though. For some reason there's a load of them about pregnancy. Don't make fun of people's facial features or else the baby will have the same features. Don't walk backwards or else the baby will come out backwards, dangerous. Face your bed towards a doorway or it'll come out sideways, also dangerous. Don't wrap rope around your hand or it'll come out with the umbilical cord around its neck, extremely dangerous. Don't drink directly from a soup bowl or it'll come out with dark skin, not touching that one. Don't put a bowl on your head or else it'll be wearing the placenta like a hat, too hilarious, and the list goes on. Central to the consequences of breaking a lot of these rules is the being known as Sedna. The story behind Sedna varies pretty wildly between different groups of Inuits, but here's the gist of it. She was once a young girl who pissed everyone off, either by being annoying or eating too much food or rejecting an arranged marriage or marrying a dog for some reason. So her father throws her out of a kayak, and when she tries to get back in, he chops off all her fingers. The sea goddess sees this, furrows her long floppy seaweed brow, does a sassy snap, and the girl turns into an immortal sea witch, while her disembodied fingers turn into the first seals. And to this day, Sedna sits at the bottom of the ocean, growing new fingers which promptly fall off and turn into all the world's seal lions and narwhalruses. That is until someone goofs up in some small arbitrary fashion like, "Yo Sedna, bad news, I just caught a guy chewing a piece of blubber. What's wrong with that?" Well, he wasn't looking north while he did it. Are you fucking kidding me? In his defense, he was standing right on the pole, so he literally couldn't look anywhere but south. He could have moved! That's it! No more fingy foods for 3 moons! Another fun creation myth is how the moon and sun came to be. So long ago, there were these two siblings named Melina and Aningin. The two got along just fine as kids, but as the two got older, they were put into their respective genders' living areas and saw each other less and less. Then one day, Aningin got the feeling that his lower nose was in dire need of some Eskimo kisses. So that night, he snuck into the women's lodge, saw his sister, thought, I pick that one, and proceeded to do, unspeakable things, technically becoming his own Eskimo brother. But it was too dark at the time for Melina to tell what happened. The next night, Ningin's like, "I'll fucking do it again." Only this time, Melina smears soot all over his face. So later she goes over to the men's lodges, and who has crap all over his face but her brother. This makes her so mad that she cuts off her own breasts with a knife, puts them in a bowl, throws them at Ningin, and says, "If you enjoy me so much, then here, eat 'em. Go ahead, eat my disembodied quivering titties." She runs off into the night with a torch, and Ningin is really remorseful or horny or something, so he chases after her with his own torch, and they end up running so fast that they took off like a plane into the sky, and Melina became the sun while Ningin became the moon. Excuse me, Mrs. Elder, if the sun and moon didn't exist yet, how did he do that stuff at night when there was no night? Now, some details of the story are tied into real-world phenomena. Some say that Aningin tripped and messed up his torch, which is why the moon is so dim. And the moon cycles are because he gets really skinny from chasing after her for so long. And the new moon is when he goes away for a few days to hunt seals so he can fatten back up. But here's the kicker. Nobody ever explains what the whole lopping off her tits part was supposed to represent. That's entirely just creative liberty. Just like, yes, that's why the sun doesn't have tits. Probably for the best it doesn't, otherwise half the population will be blind by now, and worse, it's the half that makes up 85% of my viewer base. So you know what? Thanks for slicing and dicing them tea towels, Melina. I kinda owe you my career. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and... Hey kids, if you've ever been Black Friday shopping or visited the Diablo subreddit recently, chances are you've encountered mass hysteria at some point. Mass hysteria is known medically as mass psychogenic illness, or MPI for short. It's basically just when a bunch of people start acting a fool for no discernible reason other than maybe a stressful environment. Being that this sort of thing is naturally very noticeable, there's loads of documented cases found all throughout history. Let's take a look at a few. This first one is what made me make this video in the first place. So one day sometime in the Middle Ages, a group of nuns in a French convent were enjoying a quiet, uneventful day, until one of them decided to start meowing. You know, like a cat.
You'd think this would last all of 4 seconds before another nun was like, "Excuse me, Sister Gertrude, would you kindly cut the shit?" But instead, another nun joined in, and another, until basically the entire nunnery was exchanging mouths like a group of communist trading card enthusiasts. This wasn't just a one-time thing either, it basically became integrated into their way of life. It said that on a given day, they would stand there meowing in each other's faces for hours at a time. Could you imagine being the first outsider to witness this? You might laugh now, but as they say, everybody gangsta till the nuns start meowing. I'd void my bowels and move to Malaysia without even thinking. Miles more terrifying than this pile of garbage. As you can imagine though, after a while it stopped being scary and just got annoying, leading to the neighbors calling in a band of soldiers to deal with the situation. "Hey guys, can we talk to you for a sec about Yeah, that. All due respect, but we have orders to literally beat the hell out of you with whips till you start acting like people again." "Sorry sir, it's just force of habit." Haha, habit. Seriously though, we would rather go to hell for throttling a gaggle of nuns than put up with another minute of your bullshit, caprese. Our next event took place in the parish of Fatima, Portugal in the year 1917. It all started with 3 shepherd children, ages 10, 9, and 7 respectively. They were like, "Greetings, fellow Portugueseites. We've been seeing visions of the Virgin Mary, and she told us to tell you that some real crazy shit's gonna go down in the sky on October 13th. Now, if 3 random farm children started spouting out prophecies to the public today, you'd say, "Ha, what tomfoolery. Go play in some dirt, you dirty little dirt baby." But keep in mind, the past is a different country. And Portugal's a different country, so that's like different country squared you gotta think about. Plus this was during World War I, a time where a lot of people were holding out for a miracle to begin with. So the kid's story was actually picked up and even spread by local newspapers, to the point where, when the day finally came, at least 30,000 people gathered in Fatima to witness the alleged miracle. Lo and behold, on that day, the sun began zooming around, careening towards Earth and sending rays of multicolored light cascading across the sky, creating a light show like nobody's ever seen. Keep in mind, this happened in the 20th century, way after the era where belief in divine jiggery and or pokery was considered mandatory, so naturally there were plenty of skeptics and non-believers present, and even they saw it all happen. Or so they thought. How do we know the sun didn't really whiz around haphazardly that day, Well, number 1, use your frickin' brain. And number 2, accounts differed wildly from person to person. While some say the sun zigged hither, others say it zagged thither, and others still said it shined a brilliant yellow and stayed perfectly still. As such, it was eventually concluded that the event was just a combination of MPI and weird eye stuff from too much sun staring. Although I'd like to believe it was real, just that Jesus' illusion skill was way higher than his alteration at the time. Yep, that's it. Sam's going to hell. Why, for blasphemy? Trust me, that was the least offensive part of that joke. Our next tale took place in 1962 in Tanganyika, which was basically just the beta version of Tanzania. The nation had just declared its independence from Britain the previous year, and with the future so uncertain, tensions were naturally running high around this time. One little girl in a Tanganyikan school ended up handling the stress in a bit of an unusual way. Rather than overeating or staring at her ceiling for hours like a normal person, she just started laughing, and laughing, and laughing. Pretty soon, her classmates at the all-girls school she attended began to join in, to the point where 95 of the 159 students caught the gigglies, which lasted anywhere from a few hours to 16 days straight. Beyond just the unprovoked cackling, other odd behavior included aimless running and occasional violence. The problem got so severe that the school was forced to close down temporarily, leading to the chortlers roaming the streets, spreading the affliction further. Thousands of people from all strata came to be affected, with 13 additional schools being shut down in the progress. Over the course of the hysteria, several other symptoms began to present themselves as well, ranging from obvious ones such as breathing problems, fainting, random screaming, to more anomalous things like rashes. Despite all this, no physical cause could be found, leaving MPI as the only explanation. The epidemic finally died down after between 6 and 18 months of day in, day out laughter, depending on the village. While this whole thing likely sucked for most people involved, it probably could have been worse. A lot of the time when I'm alone, I'll think to myself, man, if I ever go full schizo, I hope I'm one of the laughy ones, not one of the screamy ones. With this story in mind, just maybe, if I put my mind to it and believe hard enough, I can be both. Flashback to the year 1518 to the city of Strasbourg, at the time part of the HRE. A woman named Mrs. Trophy began fervently dancing in the streets for no discernible reason, for hours, then days. All without music, of course. Her only breaks consisted of occasional food intake and passing out from exhaustion when night came. If you saw that today, you'd just be like, ha! drugs. But apparently people found it pretty inspiring because within a week, 34 others had joined in, and after a month, there were around 400. This wasn't your casual bobbing up and down neither. This shit made Zumba look like Tai Chi. Here's the best modern day simulation I could find. Now imagine that both of those people were the same person and you got the dancing plague. This would take a toll on any healthy person, let alone a medieval city dweller. But despite bleeding feet and aching bones, they just kept going. In fact, they went so hard for so long that a good portion straight up fucking died from cardiac arrest. It got to the point where around 15 dancers were kicking the bucket every day before the city decided they had to do something about it. They managed to rule out any divine or supernatural causes, which was necessary just because, back in medieval times, it was fucking stupid. They eventually surmised that it was a natural disease caused by too much hot blood, as per that whole four humors thing that was popular at the time. As for a cure, their prescription was, get this, more dancing. I can see where they were coming from. It's pretty sound logic. If you got a song stuck in your head, you play it till you're sick of it, same kind of thing. But here's where they goofed. The authorities actually went out of their way to facilitate the dancing, setting up a big stage area and even hiring musicians to keep the afflicted moving. All this achieved was attracting more passerby who were like, man, mass psychogenic illness looks frickin' epic, let's get in on that, causing the contagion to become even more widespread. Seeing that their solution backfired, the city then went the other way and completely banned any public dancing. Those who still showed signs of the mania were subsequently carted off to the Shrine of St. Vitus, where an exorcism-like ritual was performed on them. This ended up being highly effective, presumably for no other reason than that the dancers believed it would work, and after nearly 2 months, the plague was quelled. While this whole thing was most likely a case of good old-fashioned MPI, some historians believe it might have been egged on in part by ergotism, a state of psychosis brought on by eating tainted bread, which I talked a little bit about in this video. Ding. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Kids, let's talk about Fidel Castro. We're all familiar with Castro, right? Dictator of Cuba for the whole second half of the 20th century, main antagonist of the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know. Anyway, this man loves 3 things. He loves Cuba, he loves communism, and good God, does the man love dairy. Yep, you heard me right. The all-powerful dictator of communist Cuba is obsessed with anything related to milk and its derivatives. I drew up a little chart here, right? I call it the Leche Lovin' Ladder. At the bottom you got dairy farmers, then you got Ross O'Donovan, then Mr. Bones, then starving babies, and then all the way up at the top here, you got Fidel Castro. Today, I'm going to share a few true stories that illustrate his preoccupation. Okay, the first one isn't really a story so much as a fact, but according to several sources, Castro was known to be able to eat 18 scoops of ice cream after a meal. That's more than 2 pints. If that doesn't impress you, then go try it for yourself. Me, I can barely manage a pint and a half on an empty stomach, and Castro's doing it on top of a full meal. But it gets better. Being such an ice cream connoisseur, Castro ordered the construction of an ice cream shop. But this isn't your average everyday parlor, not by a long shot. He built a straight up ice cream complex taking up an entire city block. This was a piece of modern architecture too, in total contrast to the surrounding slums, all for the sake of ice cream. The place is called Coppelia, and it's still open today. Of course, Castro's obsession went beyond just personal pleasure. Dairy was so dear to him that it often found its way into diplomatic interactions. Like one time, a French diplomat came to visit, so Castro whips out some Cuban cheese. Specifically though, it was Camembert cheese, a variety that France is famous for. French guy was like, hey, not bad, it's almost as good as the French kind. Try it again. I think you'll find it's even better than the French. Alright, I wouldn't say that. I'm sorry, are you disrespecting my cheese? In my house? On my island? No, I mean it's good, I just said the French kind is better. Maybe if you froggy fucks bathed once in a while, you'd be able to taste the cheese instead of your own B.O. Listen, you've got your cigars, we've got our cheese, live with it. Fine. Fuck him, it's good cheese. I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but that's basically how it went down. So already it's obvious that dairy is of great value to Castro. Most exceptional, however, is how this value reflected in his leadership. Naturally, having an entire nation at his disposal, Castro wanted to bolster the Cuban dairy industry as much as possible. But there was one problem. Cuba initially had 2 types of cows called La Reinas and Zebus. La Reinas came from the days when Spain ruled Cuba, and Zebus originated from India. Both of these cows are well suited to the Cuban environment, having a very high tolerance for heat. However, they don't produce much milk, they're mostly just raised for their meat. So Castro decides to import thousands of Holsteins from Canada. Holsteins are the classic black and white cows, and as we all know, you can juice these guys for days. They are utterly superior. Only problem is, they're used to living in Canada, so when they're plopped down under the scorching Caribbean sun, it's going to stress them out. They're not going to be laughing cows by any means. So as a result, Castro's imports still didn't put out enough milk to satisfy his desires. At this point, your average run-of-the-mill dairy queen would have given up. But Castro, he's more than that. He's a dairy dictator. So he ordered the construction of a giant air-conditioned complex with the sole purpose of providing a comfortable environment for his Holsteins. And it helped a little bit, but they were still stressed out. They still weren't putting out at their natural levels. And as you can imagine, climate controlling an entire facility is very expensive, so Castro was forced to abandon the project. But like the astronaut he is, Castro held on to his dream of finding the Milky Way. So he gathered a team of scientists and farmers and ordered them to breed together the Zebus and the Holsteins in order to produce a heat-resistant, lactose-pumping super cow. The breeding efforts were mostly a bust, never producing the bovine master race that Castro longed for. However, there was one exception. Under Castro's program, a single individual was born that met his expectations with flying colors. The cow was named Ubre Blanca, Spanish for white udder, and she produced world record-breaking volumes of milk, peaking at 110 liters a day. That's more than 29 entire gallons of lactation. Needless to say, Castro was absolutely euphoric at this isolated success of his. To say he went ballistic would be an understatement. He went intercontinentally ballistic. Like, India hasn't got shit on the levels of cow worship that Castro performed. Daily updates were published in the Cuban national newspaper describing Ubre Blanca's health and productivity, and when she died in 1985, Castro commissioned a giant marble statue of the cow in her honor. He also had scientists harvest tissue and egg samples for the sake of preserving her DNA. After Ubre Blanca's death, Castro's plans for the Cuban dairy industry got even more desperate and ridiculous somehow. This is based off of an actual conversation that he had with his team of scientists in 1987. Okay guys, hear me out. What if we make cows that are the size of dogs, so that way they can live in people's apartments with them? Fidel, I don't think that's gonna work. No, it'll work. You just have to grow grass in the apartment too. You can't be serious. Yeah, you just gotta put up some fluorescent lights. Bam, little grazing patch for your doggy cow. You are a fucking lunatic. And obviously nothing ever came of that idea, and Cuba's dairy industry is still floundering today, sadly. So yeah, if you haven't gotten the picture by now, the dude likes milk. Imagine he's at the birth of his grandson, right? Ah, what a beautiful baby boy. Fidel, there's something we need to tell you. Your grandson, he's lactose intolerant. Prepare the firing squad. Anyway, there's plenty of other miscellaneous stories surrounding his little preoccupation, like the time the CIA tried to poison his milkshake, so I just decided to highlight a few big ones. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, it's Wildlife Wednesday, so I'm gonna teach you about the shrike. So the shrike's a bird, right? Looks like this. Cute, right? Wrong. Turns out, you're gazing into the eyes of a cold-blooded psychopath. Don't believe me? Let me tell you about it. First off, notice how the name Shrike is like a combination of shit and spike. And already you've got a pretty good concept of what the Shrike's all about. So this is how it goes. Shrike sees prey. Shrike uses its foot spikes to grab the prey. Prey says shit. Shrike finds another spike. Shrike fucking impales its prey on the spike. Prey says shit. Shrike eats prey off of spike like some kind of hell kebab. Shrike turns prey into shit. And finally, Shrike uses the spike to clean the shit off its asshole. And the circle of life continues. Still don't believe me? Here's a picture. If that isn't some Silence of the Lambs shit, I don't know what is. I can only imagine what it does after it gets home.
Would you fuck me? I'd fuck me. I'd fuck me hard.
Thankfully, the Shrike is small enough to fit in the palm of the hand, so we're safe for now, as long as there aren't any teacup poodle conventions in town. However, the impalement is considered basic tool use, which is a sign of higher level cognitive thinking in animals. So while we're in the clear now, this guy could get even more devious as evolution progresses. 1,000 years from now, they're figuring out how to sprinkle spikes on the road to pop tires.
Watch where you walking.
Also, who knows how the Shrike's sociopathic DNA could be manipulated? Imagine like a bunch of Al-Qaeda biologists weaponizing the Shrike. We will breed it with their national bird. Those American pig dogs will never see it coming. But Abdul, what will we call this new creature? The bald shingle. And a hop, skip, and a jump later, and suddenly you've got kindergartners impaled on stop signs. Birdemic 3, should you use my idea, I expect compensation. So when you go to bed tonight, kids, make sure to lock your windows, or else you might wake up with a spike up Uranus and bird shit smeared on the walls. Hey kids, it's Misk Monday, so I'm gonna tell you all a story from my childhood. I was in 5th grade at the time, about 10 or 11. I was in that YMCA aftercare program at my school, you know, where they watch kids for a while before their parents pick them up, right? So the story centers around 2 other kids there. One was a 5th grader, we'll call him Carl, and the other was a 1st grader, we'll call him Tyrone. So to preface, Tyrone was a bit odd. He didn't talk much, he was always just kinda looking around, but generally he was a good kid. So one day I'm sitting there, minding my own business, when I see Carl walk into the bathroom. And then, about 10 seconds later, I see Tyrone follow him in there. I didn't really think anything of it until I hear Carl shout from inside the bathroom. I look over and Tyrone comes running out crying. So the counselors ask him what happened. Tyrone points at Carl and says, "He pushed me." They asked Carl if it was true, and Carl gives the full explanation of what actually went down in the bathroom. So it turns out Carl was just at the urinal, minding his own business, when Tyrone walks in, walks right up to him, and starts poking him on the balls while he's peeing. So Carl, who was still, midstream, couldn't really use his hands to stop him, so he reflexively did this sort of hip check to push the kid away. The kid hits the ground, immediately starts crying, and runs out of the bathroom. So the counselors excused Carl and politely asked Tyrone what he was doing touching an older boy's nads. Tyrone replies, I just wanted to make sure he got all the pee out. So ultimately, it just ended with the counselors explaining to him that you shouldn't touch other people's junk. I'm just glad he decided to pull this sort of thing now in a public school to another kid. Imagine if he did this in a public restroom. It would have probably ended with some guy getting arrested. Thankfully, Tyrone never touched another sack again, as far as I know.
Hey kids, today I've got another character study for you all, a man known as Zhang Zhengshan. In 1881, he was born into poverty in the Shandong region of China. His father was a head shaver, not a barber mind you. If a head shaver's a barber, then a ditch digger's an architect. He also moonlit as an alcoholic. His mom, meanwhile, was a literal practicing witch and exorcist, already a recipe for success. Zhang joined a group of roving bandits at age 20, as one does, right around the Xinhai Revolution, where the Qing dynasty was overthrown and the Republic of China was established. But in 1916, the kidneys of the nation's widely disliked monarchist leader done shat the bed, causing a power vacuum that ultimately led to what is known as the warlord era of the Republic. During this time, different regions of China were constantly shifting hands between a collection of separate military groups, all of whom were ruthless both to each other and to the people they ruled over. And through charisma, favors to the right people, and a keen sense of military pragmatism, our humble highwaymen soon came to be one of these warlords. Now Zhang was quite skilled as a leader of war. After the Russian Civil War, he recruited thousands of fleeing white Russians, not beverages, but Bolshevik butchers, which bolstered his battalions and brought big bonuses to his bloodshed. He also made efficient use of armored trains, which proved to be highly cost-effective at transporting large amounts of troops and supplies. But that's not what you people care about, you want some clownage. Well, rest assured, Zhang was quite the character. Now we all know the age-old debate between positive and negative reinforcement. On the one hand, if you treat people well, you'll probably get the same treatment back later down the line. But on the other hand, nobody's ever taught a tiger to jump through flaming hoops with just pets and temptations. And if you think that's messed up, that's because, well, yeah, it is. Circuses are fucking evil. But like all great leaders, Zhang knew how to appropriately apply both the carrot and the stick. As an example of the former, he defeated the forces of enemy General Wu Peifu largely by convincing members of his army to defect, with the promise that they could keep their original rank after switching sides, which he fulfilled. But then he was like, yeah, I don't know if my loyal men would be too happy about being outranked by strangers. Well, only one solution here. All my guys are ranking up. Problem was, so many officers were promoted that Zhang literally ran out of gold and silver to make new insignias. He was like, I gotta think about this. Went out for a smoke, looked down, hey, wait a minute, and had the rest of the emblems made out of the colorful foil found in cigarette packages. It said that during the promotion ceremony, people would look down and notice their little star already had a rip in it before the event was even over. But hey, there's still a colonel or poobah or whatever now, they can't complain. On another occasion, he proudly announced that he would either win an upcoming battle or return home in his coffin. And though Zhang was many things, he was not a liar. So after he ended up retreating, his men paraded him through the streets in a casket while he waved and sheafed on a cigar. So you're probably wondering why they called him the dog meat general. general. At this point, my head was swimming with lurid fantasies about him eating dog flesh, or wearing dog flesh, or eating dog flesh. Turns out, nah, he was just real into pai gow, of which the act of playing was colloquially referred to as eating dog meat. And also because he ate dogs. He was also sometimes jokingly referred to as the three don't knows, since he didn't know how much money he had, how many concubines he had, or how many men were in his army. While funny, there was some truth to the nickname, which did sometimes cause issues. Some were minor. For one, he had a lot of trouble remembering the names of the 30 to 50 women of all nationalities in his harem, but he got around this by just assigning them numbers. Number 4 is real flexible, 27 makes a killer quiche, watch out for 14, she's a biter, and so forth. Other times, things got a little more dire. Later in his career, Zhang became the military governor of the province of Shandong, and while the warlord life suited him, domestic affairs were another story. Rampant human rights violations aside, the whole thing was just way poorly managed. For example, while Zhang did collect taxes on everything from theater performances to tobacco examination licenses, relatively little of his extortions went towards his war efforts or anything practical, with most of it being funneled into vanity projects and his own personal riches. So how did he fund his army? Well, for those playing at home, it's time to take a shot, because Zhang printed tens of millions of dollars worth of paper money in the form of military stamps with no reserve to back them up. Obviously, massive inflation ensued, but Zhang just said no, insisted the stamps had a 1-to-1 conversion with real money, and continued paying his men at the same rate. Fortunately for them, the invisible hand of the market is no match for the very visible fist of the soldier, because they just kick old merchant ladies' asses till they accepted the currency at face value. But unfortunately, kicking old ladies' asses can't solve everything. In the summer of 1927, Shandong was hit with a famine caused primarily by drought. At the time, many people prayed to Zhongxian, a folk deity, in an attempt to bring rain to these crusty lands. But Zhang Zhongxiang, he don't get on his knees for nobody. He walked right up to the statue in Xian's temple, starts bitch slapping it, tells it to go fornicate with its sister, and then has his artillery crew fire shells straight into the sky for hours on end to show that god who he's dealing with. Sources differ on when the next rain was, but it did eventually rain, so in the end, Zhongxiang got the last laugh. Speaking of which, our boy was also a renowned poet. Here's a piece he wrote about that very event. The sky god is also named Zhang. Why does he make life hard for me? If it doesn't rain in 3 days, I'll demolish your temple. Then I'll have cannons bombard your mom. Truly prophetic. He's got a few other good ones too. Let me just dim the lights real quick. Yeah. This one's called Visiting Mount Tai. From afar, Mount Tai looks blackish, narrow on top and wide at the bottom. If you flipped it upside down, it would be narrow at the bottom and wide on top. I like that one a lot, because it's like he heard about metaphors without realizing they're supposed to have a second meaning. This one's titled Poem About Bastards. You tell me to do this, he tells me to do that. You are all bastards, go fuck your mother. Poignant. But unlike most poets besides E. E. Cummings and Emily Dickinson, Zhang was quite well endowed. He was often referred to as General 86, as when Zhang Jr. stood up straight, he could reportedly reach the length of 86 Mexican silver dollars stacked atop one another. Given a thickness of 2.4 millimeters, this would put him at around 20.6 centimeters or 8.1 inches. That's especially impressive given that he was likely malnourished during puberty due to both poverty and the 1896 famine. You racists. I thought of a few other jokes about this, but I couldn't fit them in the narrative, so I'll just rattle them off. Should have been called the horse meat general. When he got out of the pool, he was General 12. This one just says dong hung dong. You get the point. But all great things must eventually come to an end. After suffering a series of defeats at the hands of his enemies and a subsequent failed rebellion against a quickly reunifying China, Zhang was forced to run away in 1928, bringing his mom with him to Beppu, Japan. His time here was relatively uneventful, except for when he shot a former prince in the back for trying it on with one of his concubines. In court, he said the gun just happened to go off while he was pointing it at the center of the guy's mask. For some reason, they're like, nothing suspicious here. Gave him the choice between 15 days in prison or a $150 fine. He chose the latter. Zhang's story finally came to an end in 1932 when he went back to Shandong not as a conqueror but as a visitor. Unfortunately, it seems it takes people more than 4 years to get over murder because he was unceremoniously assassinated by the nephew of an officer that he had executed. All in all, Zhang left behind quite a strange legacy. Given the litany of horrible crimes that I've seemed to kind of gloss over, he's generally regarded as the stinkiest stain of an already messy portion of the tapestry that is Chinese history. The only remaining question is if one can truly separate the art from the artist. During his rule, Time magazine described him as China's basest warlord. I'll let you decide whether or not they forgot the DE. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and I'm hiding in your fridge.
Hey kids, let's talk about babies for a second. Now I think we can all agree, generally, babies suck at most things, either literally or figuratively. They have almost no life skills whatsoever. However, as it turns out, babies do actually have some traits that make them superior to adults adults in certain isolated aspects. In this video, I'm going to tell you guys about a few. First is the baby's non-drowning reflex. If babies under the age of 6 months are put underwater, they'll instinctively hold their breath. Additionally, their heartbeat begins to slow down as soon as they're submerged, which allows them to use much less oxygen and, as a result, stay alive much longer than the average person. As we all know, babies get themselves into bad situations all the time. Soon as your back is turned, they're off trying to lick another socket or whatever. So this reflex probably evolved from back in the day, right? Mom's off picking berries, baby wanders off, ends up in the middle of a lake, and somehow this whole reflex thing gives the village more time to, go get a raft and fish them out. Next is a baby's grip. They're able to support their entire body weight with just one hand, which is more than a lot of adults can do. Of course, it's kind of cheating because they only weigh as much as a baby, but it's still kind of impressive. This trait is shared by apes, whose babies instinctively cling on to the backs of their mothers. So that way, if she gets a little courageous swinging from branch to branch, the baby doesn't just go flying. Anyway, because of this, it's speculated that babies actually got their firm grasp from our ape ancestors millions of years ago. And it's only a bit later in life when your genetics go, oh yeah, legs neat, and ditch the whole grabby thing. Next, babies are also very seductive. Not in the sense of like strutting around in thigh highs, making dudes' eyes bulge. Not that seductive, but just in the sense of, hey, I like looking at this thing. We should keep it alive for a while. Here's an example. If people saw a 5-year-old on the streets rolling around in a pile of its own shit, they'd be like, ugh, what a scumbag. But if an infant did it, people would still be like, oh man, little guy, I want to take you home, clean you up, put you in little hats. Yeah, it has to do with a baby's facial features like their large forehead and eyes, which set off a bunch of baby caring instincts in our brains, causing us to perceive cuteness. It's only when they hit like 2 or 3 when that all goes down the shitter. Lastly, babies have a surprisingly good concept of morality. According to a study by Yale University's Infant Cognition Center, babies are born with an innate sense of right and wrong. Here's how the study went, right? So first they put on a puppet show for the baby with these 2 rabbit dolls, and they made one of them act nice and the other one act like a dick. Then at the end of the show, the babies were offered either puppet, and in almost every case, the babies took the nice one. And you might say a strong grip on morality doesn't qualify as a superpower. Personally, I disagree. People are terrible at keeping their basic sense of right and wrong unless their society maintains it for them. Let me give an example. A few days ago in the Philippines, the president of the entire country basically said, hey, we should just start murdering every drug addict alive. Right now. And this isn't seen as insane over there. No, millions of Filipinos are now on board with this. It is fucked. You see, babies lack the mental capacity to justify atrocities with shit like it's about the greater good, They have no prejudice. They just see people as people. And honestly, I think we could all learn a thing or two from that. Not to get all George Carlin-y on you guys or anything. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about South Sudan. It's the newest country in the world, becoming fully independent just in 2011, so I'm going to explain why the state came into being and what it's like there today. So to understand why South Sudan exists, you kind of have to know a bit about Sudan as a whole. So before 1956, Sudan was under the joint control of Egypt and Britain. At the end of 1955, they gave a declaration of independence and became their own thing. The independence movement, however, was led by this guy, Ismail al-Azhar. And he was like, hey everybody, we are an Arab-oriented Muslim nation. But then like 8 million Sudanese black people were like, whoa now, hold your camels, Ishmael. Us Africans, we ain't all about your Allah. He was like, yeah, well who cares? Oh, I see. So they got into a civil war between the primarily Arab-Muslim North and the traditionally oriented African South. That went on for 16 years until finally the North's like, alright fine, you can do your thing. Like you're still part of Sudan, but you can govern yourself for the most part. We'll take our falafels elsewhere. And that peace treaty lasted 11 years from 1972 to 1983. Eventually, the South was like, well things aren't that bad now, but the Arabs still technically control us, so it could get worse. And I'm not in the mood for any Sharia law anytime soon, so we should probably go back to fighting. So then there was another civil war, which was basically a continuation of the first one, and that ran on from 1983 all the way to 2005, when finally the two sides made a comprehensive peace agreement, which led to South Sudan becoming totally self-governing in 2006. Then after 5 more years of fiddling around with paperwork, South Sudan became a fully fledged independent nation in 2011. So notice how there were 2 civil wars before the South gained independence. I guess you could say 2 coups make a Sudan. So now that they finally got what they want, it must be great to live in South Sudan now, right? No, not really. It's actually just about the worst place you could ever choose to live in. Seriously, if somebody gave me the choice of moving to South Sudan or living the rest of my life with my dick inside an anthill, I'd be slathering on the honey before they even finish their sentence. Let me talk about a few reasons South Sudan sucks so bad. First, let me talk about ethnic groups. Europe, as we all know, contains a lot of ethnic groups. Scots, Serbs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Spaniards, Swedes, and those are just the big ones that start with S. There's like 100 others. The same is true with Africa. There are thousands of localized ethnic groups sprinkled all over the continent, whether or not you could tell from first glance. As such, South Sudan is home to a bunch of different peoples, each with their own languages and customs. And these groups have a long history of disagreeing with each other, like they don't get along much. So that's one thing. Second, remember how South Sudan was at war with the North for basically all of the past half a century? Well, as a result, the whole place is pretty geared for war and not much else. Their infrastructure is abysmal and they've got all these guns just lying around waiting to be shot at something. Third, South Sudan has a bunch of oil reserves in different locations around the nation, and we all know how much people like oil. Everybody wants control of whatever wells they can get. So between these three things, the whole place is basically one big whirlpool of chaos. At any given time, the South Sudan government is at war with at least 7 different armed groups from around the country, each of which is also at war with the other groups. And if that's not enough of a shitstorm, the government ended up basically splitting in two in 2013. This is what happened. So you've got the president, his name is Salva Kiir, and yes, he does actually wear a hat like this. It was a gift from George Bush, true story. And then the vice president, his name is Riek Machar. I'm probably saying those wrong, but it's fine. They don't have internet in South Sudan, so nobody can call me out here. So anyway, Salva Kiir, he's very aware of the fact that the country's in a very precarious spot at the moment. So he starts taking greater control of the government and the military, dismissing old people and installing those that he sees fit. And so Riek Machar, he's like, well, gee whiz, Salva Kiir, for someone who calls himself a president, that's pretty dictatory of you. Well, for someone who calls himself the vice president, that's pretty annoying assholey of you. Sir, all I'm saying is, I'm getting pretty sick of you and that gay hat of yours. I'm not wearing a hat. As president of South Sudan, I order you to put on a hat. Yeah, see? That hat's gay. You're wearing the exact same hat. Alright, fuck you, you're out of a job. Wait, what? Yep, you and your whole cabinet, get out. Okay, I made up the part about the hat, but the rest of that is true. Also, I should mention that Kiir and Machar come from 2 different ethnic groups. See, Kiir is a Dinka, whereas Machar is a Nuer, which only heightened the tensions between the two. So after Machar got the boot, he ended up taking a chunk of the military with him, most of which were Nuers like him, and they started a rebellion against Kiir's government. This is known as the South Sudan Civil War, and it's still going on to this day. So yeah, to sum it up, if you looked up clusterfuck in the dictionary, well, you wouldn't find anything because clusterfuck isn't a real word. But if it was, there would probably be a picture of South Sudan next to it. Seriously, this place makes Hotel Rwanda look like Hotel California. And throughout it all, there's still a bunch of hardworking individuals just trying to make a living, farming or herding or whatever. But the constant warfare makes it so the average person has to live in virtually Stone Age conditions. Which sucks, but, what can you do? So that's the story of the world's newest nation, kids. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.